Chapter 541. The horse-drawn carriage came to a halt in a dense forest filled with towering trees. All of the mercenaries on the horse-drawn carriage immediately sprang into action. The Minotaur demon Dennis and Orc Skull got off the carriage and stood at the very front with their weapons raised. Scott and Sam also got off the carriage and stood at the back of the carriage, surveying their surroundings with wary expressions. Sydney the monkey dashed through the trees like a real monkey, disappearing from view in the blink of an eye. Evan was still sitting in the horse-drawn carriage with his wand in his hand as he surveyed his surroundings. Eva also remained in her seat, but she reflexively inched closer to Evan. Meg held Amy tightly in his arms with his right hand resting on his bull-slaying saber. Carrying a long sword would make others think that he was hiding something, so he decided to switch to a bull-slaying saber for now. He looked around with a curious expression, but didn't see anything worthy of a fight. As such, he couldn't help but wonder why Kywell had suddenly stopped with such a serious expression on his face. Amy's eyes were also filled with curiosity. This was the first time she had been with a mercenary squad, and she was feeling a little excited that she was about to experience her first battle. Ugly Duckling, who had been dozing off in Amy's arms this entire time, suddenly opened its eyes wide. Its ears perked up, and it stuck its neck out to sniff carefully. It then looked around at the surrounding forest in alarm, as if it had discovered something of interest. "What's that, leader?" Dennis looked around, but didn't discover anything suspicious, so he turned to Kywell with a question. The other mercenaries were also rather perplexed, but there was no doubt in their eyes. They had absolute trust in Kywell. "It's an adult purple golden mink. We're quite lucky. If we can catch this little guy today, our rewards won't be any less than those of the Ironhide Bulls," Kywell said with a smile. A purple golden mink. All of the mercenaries were elated to hear this. "I didn't think we'd encounter a purple golden mink here. I heard someone offered 500 gold coins for a purple golden mink fur, and it's even more expensive than gold. We sure are lucky today." Dennis rubbed his hands together in an excited manner. The purple golden mink is very cunning and cowardly, and it's extremely fast as well. It won't be easy for us to capture it in this forest. We can only get Monkey to lead it toward us first, then we can capture it. We only have one chance, and if we fail, it won't fall for our trap again. The smile on Chewell's face faded, and a serious expression appeared on his face. He stood on the shaft of the carriage and surveyed his surroundings before pointing at the intersection between two mounds of dirt as he said, "Let's wait there. Sam, set up your traps, and everyone else, spread out. If the purple golden mink appears, don't be in a hurry to capture it. Instead, try to lure it in a certain direction, then use Evan and Sam's traps to capture it. Remember, the most valuable part of the purple golden mink is its fur. The price of a complete purple golden mink fur is vastly different from that of a damaged one. Even if we can't capture it alive, it's best not to damage too much of its fur," Kywell cautioned in a serious manner. "Yes." All of the mercenaries replied in unison before spreading out to surround the intersection. Meanwhile, Sam carried a large sack on his back as he made his way toward the intersection to set up his traps. "Mr. Meg, this is an emergency, so we need some time to capture this purple golden mink. Under normal circumstances, purple golden minks won't attack people of their own accord, but as a second-tier magic beast, they're still quite powerful. If they're caught in a dire situation, there's a good chance that they'll go berserk. Hence, I think you and Eva can stay on the carriage until we capture it," Kywell said as he turned to Meg. Evan stood up and shot a cold glance at Mag. He pursed his lips with disdain before leaping onto the branch of a nearby tree. He then treaded nimbly on the branch as he traversed through the forest. If it weren't for the fact that one of his hands was tugging at his pants in a strange manner, he would appear to be a little more elegant. "Even his jumps are so cool, I'm so lucky." An intoxicated expression appeared on Eva's face before she glowered at Meg with a hint of disgust in her eyes before sitting down in the corner furthest away from them. "No problem." Meg nodded in response. Purple golden mink fur was one of the most popular clothing materials for nobles, so Meg knew a thing or two about it. Even a rabbit would bite when cornered, let alone a second-tier magic beast. As such, Kywell was indeed looking out for their safety. Of course, He was also concerned that they would pose a threat to their encirclement. The purple golden mink wasn't all that powerful, but it was extremely fast. Even a high-grade knight wouldn't necessarily be able to catch up to it in the forest, which was why its fur was so expensive. If it weren't for the fact that they had encountered it by chance, the Rose Mercenary Squad definitely wouldn't have targeted it as their mission target. The failure rate for capturing purple golden minks was extremely high, so they were only trying their luck. As for Eva, Meg couldn't even be bothered to take a second glance at her. Bickering with a woman like her would only lower his IQ. Kywell nodded before stopping the horse-drawn carriage beside a patch of dense bushes, which just so happened to block their line of sight. She then untied the whip hanging from her waist before slinging it onto the branch of a large tree. She then swung herself onto a nearby tree and lashed out with her whip over and over again, using it to quickly traverse through the forest. Big Sister Kywell is so awesome, Amy exclaimed with elation in her eyes. She really is. Meg looked at Kywell as she swung through the trees, and he couldn't help but recall Lara from Tomb Raider. Father, what's a purple golden mink? Amy turned to Meg with a curious expression. It's a type of large mouse with purplish golden fur, Meg explained with a smile. A large mouse. Amy's eyes lit up, and she looked down at Ugly Duckling as she said, Ugly Duckling, it's a mouse. Can you catch it? Heh, what do you mean by a large mouse? The purple golden mink is a second-tier magic beast. There's no way a little kitten would be able to catch it, Eva scoffed at Ugly Duckling, which was only slightly larger than a palm in Amy's arms. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling took a glance at Eva, seemingly a little displeased with her words as it extended its little pink paw in a threatening manner. You're wrong, Big Sister Flatchest. Ugly Duckling isn't a kitten, it's a duckling, and it's most likely a duckling that can catch mice. Amy shook her head with a serious expression. If even it can catch a purple golden mink, then I'll eat it raw. Eva's body trembled with rage upon hearing Amy's words, and she harumphed coldly as she turned away. It's here. A short and long whistle sounded from afar. A monkey-like figure was running through the trees at high speed. In front of him, there was a purple gold figure jumping on the tree trunk at an even faster speed. It was almost impossible to see the figure clearly. One could only see a purple gold shadow. Chapter 542. The mercenaries of the Rose Mercenary Squad had already concealed themselves in the forest. The massive trees and lush foliage provided the best cover, and they were all waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Dennis was the first to strike, and he emerged from behind a large tree before swinging his massive mace toward the purple golden mink, which just so happened to land on a nearby tree. The mace barely missed the mink before crashing into the tree. The tree was as thick as two grown men, and it fell to the ground with a resounding crack. The purple golden mink was given a massive fright, and it let loose a cry of surprise as it tried to escape from Dennis. However, right at this moment, a green figure rushed out from behind the tree that the purple golden mink was trying to land on, and a massive black shield came crashing down viciously toward the purple golden mink. A human-like expression of shock and horror appeared on the purple golden mink's face, but as a second-tier magic beast that excelled at escaping, it wasn't going to give up so easily. It spread open its four limbs as if it were a paraglider, and faint golden light shone from its limbs as it forcibly changed direction in mid-air. It glided past the shield, then kicked off a nearby tree with all its might, leaving 4 deep grooves in its wake as it leaped toward the next tree at an even faster speed. Where do you think you're going? Scott emerged from behind a large tree and appeared right in its path. He gripped his long sword tightly with both hands and slashed it down toward the purple golden mink with devastating force. The purple golden mink had no way to evade, so it extended its claws, which were enshrouded in golden light, toward the long sword. Ding! The sound of metal clashing rang out, and sparks flew as the long sword clashed with the claws. The purple golden mink plummeted to the ground and rolled on the spot before quickly circling around the tree as if nothing had happened. It continued onward as if nothing had happened to it, and it was trying to avoid the corner where the tree was located. There, it could sense a dangerous aura. Right at this moment, a black boomerang flew toward it from behind, evading the trees around it as if it had a mind of its own before hurtling directly toward the purple golden mink. The purple golden mink had initially planned to turn left, but it could only forcibly change its direction again. It leaped left and right through the trees toward the corner between two hills in an attempt to shake off the boomerang that seemed to have eyes of its own, as well as the man that had been tailing it this entire time. As long as it crossed the two hills, the forest would become denser, and its small body would be able to escape easily. Sam was holding a green vine in his hand as he stared intently at the oncoming purple-golden mink with rapt attention. In another direction, Evan was leaning against a tree trunk with a relaxed expression. His legs were crossed in an awkward manner, and he was holding a white wand as he looked down at the purple-golden mink. This mercenary group is indeed not simple to be able to achieve such coordination with a level 3 strength. Meg exclaimed in his heart. With Meg Alex's eyes, he could easily judge their strength. The members of the Rose mercenary group were all around level 3. Kywell and Dennis were close to level 4. Scott and Scott were level 3. Sydney and Sam were probably level 2. With the same level of strength, if there was a tacit understanding between them, their strength would increase exponentially. This was the case for the Rose mercenary group. In such a lush forest, the 7 of them were able to force the purple-golden mink into a certain direction through their teamwork. It appeared that this hunt was in the bag. Meow. Ugly Duckling extended its neck with an eager expression as it spread open its little paws to reveal its sharp claws. The panicked purple-golden mink rushed directly toward the traps that Sam had set up. In a short period of time, Sam had already set up 3 traps, all of which were designed to target agile prey like the purple-golden mink. He was confident that he would be able to catch it as soon as it entered the predetermined area. Eva also stood up and looked in that direction with a nervous expression. The boomerang flew through the air in a beautiful arc before landing in Chiwell's hand. A smile appeared on his face as he looked at the purple-golden mink rushing directly toward the traps. However, he still continued to charge in that direction with his boomerang in hand, ready to unleash another attack at a moment's notice. Monkey also continued to pursue the purple-golden mink. Before the prey had been caught, any complacency could result in all of their efforts being wasted. However, just as the purple-golden mink was about to fall into the trap, a sly look suddenly flashed through its eyes, and it spread open its 4 limbs again before changing directions in midair. A wooden cage fell from the sky, landing right in front of it less than half a meter away. 2 rows of arrows whizzed through the air, and the final trap wasn't activated by Sam at all. "H, stop right there, you filthy beast." Evan's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, thinking that the hunt was over. However, he didn't slow down in the slightest. He waved his wand toward the purple-golden mink, and 4 walls of ice rose up around it, trapping it within. "Master Evan is so awesome," Eva exclaimed with reverence in her eyes. Crack! The purple-golden mink swept its claws through the air, and 3 streaks of purplish-golden light appeared on its sharp claws, shattering the walls of ice before it. How is this possible? Eva looked on with incredulity. "Bastard. Go to hell. Icicle chain." Evan raised an eyebrow upon seeing this. It was quite embarrassing that he hadn't even been able to trap a single purple-golden mink. He made a silent chant and waved his wand through the air, upon which 5 icicles that were close to a meter in length appeared in unison before hurtling toward the purple-golden mink at an extremely fast speed. Howl! The purple-golden mink raised its head and let loose a sharp cry after shattering the walls of ice. Its body instantly swelled to twice its original size, and the purple fur on its head extended all the way to its tail. Purplish-golden light revolved around its body, and it stood up on its hind legs before slamming its front paws through the air, shattering the 5 icicles amid a string of popping sounds. "That's a mutant purple-golden mink. It's already at the 3rd tier. And it's extremely aggressive," Kywell exclaimed. After dispersing the 5 icicles with ease, the purple-golden mink looked up at Evan with a provocative expression before pressing its paws into the tree trunk, leaving a deep trench in its wake. It then turned around and charged toward the nearby horse-drawn carriage. After transforming, its speed had more than doubled, and it instantly shook off Monkey and Kywell. "Crap, it's targeting the carriage. Stop it." Chiwell's expression changed drastically as he hurled his boomerang through the air in hot pursuit of the purple-golden mink. All of the other mercenaries also rushed toward the horse-drawn carriage with expressions of shock on their faces. Only Meg, Eva, and Eva were on the carriage. Eva was a first-tier healing magic caster, Meg was only a chef, and Amy was only a child. If they were to face this berserk mutant purple golden mink, they would most likely be in grave danger. In that case, you can all go to hell. Evan withdrew his wand upon seeing this, a cruel smile appeared on his face. No. Eva's expression changed drastically at the sight of the ferocious mutant purple golden mink, and she hurtled back in retreat before falling onto her bottom. Go, ugly duckling. Chapter 543. Ugly Duckling's round body drew a beautiful parabola through the air before plunging headfirst into the thick layer of leaves on the side of the road, leaving only its chubby backside and two hind paws exposed as it wagged its tail slightly. PFFFT. Amy faltered momentarily before bursting into laughter. She looked at the oncoming purple golden mink, and clenched her little fists as she yelled, "Come on, ugly duckling. The big rat is coming. If we can't catch it, then we won't have anything to eat for lunch. If we can't catch it, then we'll have to eat, pop." Before Amy had a chance to finish her sentence, Ugly Duckling pulled its head out of the leaves on the ground. It looked up at the oncoming mutant purple golden mink with its orange fur standing on end, and it was as if it had transformed into an orange hedgehog. It arched its back, extended its right paw, and spread open its claws to reveal its sharp claws. That little thing will be torn to shreds with just one swipe of its claws, right? Eva thought to herself as she looked at Ugly Duckling. She slowly inched toward another corner of the horse-drawn carriage. If the purple golden mink were to charge toward them, it would definitely attack the nearest target first. As long as the father and daughter duo could buy some time, she would have a chance to wait for Evan's rescue. With Evan in mind, Eva looked up at the tree in the distance, and her eyes immediately widened. In contrast with Kywil and the other mercenaries who were rushing toward the horse-drawn carriage, Evan was standing on the branch of the tree in a completely stationary manner. He was clearly the closest to the carriage, and as a magic caster, he had many long-range spells, but he was standing on the spot with a dazzling smile on his face, as if he were waiting for a good show to begin. No way. Master Evan must be preparing a powerful spell, one that can instantly kill that mutant purple golden mink. Eva shook her head as she told herself that. However, the image of Evan's smile was still lingering in her mind, and for the first time, a sense of horror worse than death welled up in her heart. It's so fast. Kywil and the other mercenaries looked on as the purple golden mink charged toward the horse-drawn carriage like a bolt of purple lightning. Mutant magic beasts often developed some type of powerful ability, and this purple golden mink's most powerful ability was most likely its sharp front claws, which had been able to easily break through Evan's ice spikes. If such a crazed purple golden mink were to charge into the carriage, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even their boomerangs couldn't catch up to the purple golden mink, so Kywil knew that they wouldn't be able to stop it. The wall of ice that was supposed to block the purple golden mink's path didn't appear, so they didn't buy any more time. They could only hope that Meg and the others would be able to buy them. Running away was obviously not the right choice, and in a direct confrontation, Eva, a first-tier healing magic caster, had no combat ability at all. Amy, who looked to be only 4 or 5 years old, obviously couldn't do it either, so Mag, who had a bull-slaying knife on his waist, became their only hope. Was that finger just a coincidence, or was he really hiding something? It seemed that they had reached the most critical moment. Right at this moment, Amy rose to her feet and tossed out a ball of unknown orange object, which was none other than the orange kitten. The kitten, which was only around the size of a human palm, was completely different from the purple golden mink, which was over a meter in length. The kitten was so tiny that it felt as if the purple golden mink would be able to send it flying with a gentle bump. However, the kitten bravely stood in front of the horse-drawn carriage with its back arched and one of its little paws extended. Could it be that Meg is trying to use this kitten to stop the purple golden mink? A ridiculous thought flashed through the hearts of all of the mercenaries upon seeing this. Arrogant and ignorant fools often die the quickest deaths. The purple golden mink was even able to break through my icicle chain, so there's no way this kitten will be able to stop it. Does it really think it's a massive rat? A cold smile appeared on Evan's face as he rushed toward the horse-drawn carriage. White light lit up on the tip of his wand again, and he had already missed the opportunity to stop the horse-drawn carriage. Only by sacrificing a few people would these boorish bastards realize just how important and noble he was, and how they should treat him. As for Eva, that lowly woman with mediocre looks and figure, she was only useful when he couldn't take it anymore. However, it seemed that she had recently developed some thoughts that she shouldn't have, and this was an opportunity for him to get rid of her once and for all. The purple golden mink arrived near the horse-drawn carriage in the blink of an eye like a bolt of purplish golden lightning. Its purplish golden fur was shimmering with a metallic sheen, but its adorable appearance had been replaced by a sinister one. A pair of long fangs protruded from the corners of its mouth, and its eyes had turned crimson. It opened its cavernous mouth so wide that it could easily swallow Ugly Duckling whole like a wild dog. It had clearly also discovered Ugly Duckling, and a hint of bewilderment appeared in its bloodshot eyes as it slowed down slightly. However, that hint of bewilderment quickly disappeared, and its eyes turned crimson as it became even more ferocious. Its front claws, which were over 10 centimeters in length, were easily able to crush a large rock, and it sped up again before opening its cavernous mouth to bite down toward Ugly Duckling. In the face of the purple golden mink's gaping maw, Ugly Duckling wasn't intimidated in the slightest. Its little ears perked up, and it stood up on its hind legs before letting loose a menacing cry toward the purple golden mink. Meow tilde. Its meow was very soft and tender, and Meg almost couldn't help but burst into laughter. His confidence had been completely ruined by that meow. He had thought that Ugly Duckling would reveal its extraordinary side in this dire situation. After all, Ugly Duckling had been very eager and fearless this entire time. However, it appeared that this wasn't because it was powerful. Instead, it was because it was truly stupid. After all, it dared to extend its claws toward a giant dragon, so it clearly had nothing to do with its power to display hostility toward a purple golden mink. Meg's hand was already on the hilt of his saber. At such a close distance, he was confident that he would be able to kill the purple golden mink before its fangs landed on Ugly Duckling. His sword really was very fast. Eat it. It's best if you eat it all. Eva's eyes widened as she shrank into a corner of the horse-drawn carriage. Sivir caught the returning boomerang and hurled it out again. At the same time, she did her best to increase her speed. There was a hint of reluctance in her eyes, but if this little cat could buy her some time, then she would be able to catch up. However, just as Meg was about to attack, the purple golden mink's eyes immediately widened upon hearing Ugly Duckling's cry. It was as if it had heard the knell of death, and it looked at Ugly Duckling with boundless horror in its eyes. It spread open all 4 of its limbs, and the skin from its elbows to its knees instantly tightened as it tried to turn around and flee. However, its powerful aura instantly plummeted, and it didn't dare to face Ugly Duckling directly. However, the purple golden mink was already right in front of Ugly Duckling, and it had only just turned halfway when Ugly Duckling patted it on the head with its little paw. Slap. Chapter 544. Ding. The boomerang was nailed to the ground not far away, and its handle was still trembling violently. All of the oncoming horse-drawn carriage slowly came to a halt as they stared at the purple golden mink and the palm-sized orange cat with incredulity in their eyes. The mutant purple golden mink was at least a 3rd-tier magic beast, yet it had been slapped to death by this little guy's soft paw. Or had it been scared to death? What is this little cat? Everyone's hearts were filled with bewilderment. How could this be? Evan stopped on a tree and looked on with an incredulous expression. He was prepared to subdue the purple golden mink after it killed the 3 people in the carriage. That way, he would be able to get rid of Meg and his daughter, as well as get rid of Eva and display his true power to intimidate the other mercenaries. However, his plan had been foiled by a little cat. What? A hint of elation flashed through Eva's eyes upon seeing this. However, she then looked at the purple golden mink lying in front of Ugly Duckling, and thought back to what she had just said, upon which her expression darkened significantly. Meow tilde. Ugly Duckling stepped forward and placed its little paw on the purple golden mink's head before turning to Amy with a smug expression. You're the best, Ugly Duckling. Amy clapped her little hands with elation before turning to Eva with a smile as she said, Flat-chested big sister, Ugly Duckling caught the big rat. Are you going to eat it now or later? Eva's body was trembling with rage, but she was the one who had said those words, so she didn't even have a good retort. Her face was as red as a monkey's butt. What the hell is this thing? It's definitely not an ordinary orange cat. Could it be some kind of ancient mythological beast? But it was picked up by a herb gatherer so easily. That's so lame. Mag was also quite surprised to see this. It was able to scare a mutated third-tier magic beast to death with just a soft cry, and he still thought that it was just an ordinary orange fatso. If he still thought that it was just an ordinary orange fatso, then he would have lived 2 lives in vain. However, in his memory, there were no powerful magic beasts that looked like orange cats. Could it be that it could grow into an elephant and crush its opponents with its weight? In any case, he could at least confirm that he had struck gold when he had bought an egg from a random street stall. As for what this little orange cat would grow into, Meg wasn't sure, but according to the law of oranges, it was most likely going to grow into a ball. Now that the danger had been averted, Meg put down his saber. He looked at Ugly Duckling, which was running back to the horse-drawn carriage and meowing at Amy for a hug. Perhaps it would be a great help to Amy in the future, just like the purple-striped griffin had been to Meg Alex. Meg jumped down from the horse-drawn carriage with Amy in his arms. Amy bent down and picked up Ugly Duckling with a serious expression as she said, "Well done, Ugly Duckling." Kywell pulled his boomerang from the ground and put it back on his waist before turning to Meg and the others, and asked, "Are you guys all right?" "We're fine. I wonder if the one in the carriage is all right." Meg shook his head with a smile as he pointed at Eva, who was still slumped in the horse-drawn carriage. "Eva." Kywell quickly made his way over to Eva with a concerned expression. I'm fine." Eva stood up from the edge of the horse-drawn carriage with a shake of her head. Her legs were still trembling slightly. The purple golden mink had just broken through everyone's encirclement and even taken Evan's attack head-on, and she had thought that she was going to die here. However, there was no hint of gratitude in her eyes as she looked at Meg and Amy. Instead, there was a hint of resentment in her eyes. How could even their cat be able to scare a mutant purple golden mink to death? Was she really going to eat the purple golden mink raw? All of the mercenaries also gathered around and looked at Ugly Duckling in Amy's arms with curiosity in their eyes. It was only a cub, but it was already able to scare a third-tier magic beast to death. This little guy was most likely the offspring of some kind of high-tier magic beast. However, they didn't know how it had fallen into the hands of Meg and Amy, and how it had become Amy's pet. "Amy, what kind of magic beast is this kitten of yours? It's so powerful." Dennis stroked his own hair with a bashful smile on his face as he looked at Amy. Everyone turned to Amy upon hearing that. Even Kywell was also looking at Ugly Duckling in Amy's arms with a curious expression. It was very difficult to encounter cub magic beasts, especially high-tier magic beasts. Generally speaking, if a magic beast's mother was attacked, she would kill her own cub first, even if it was still an egg. However, this little kitten was so close to Amy, so it was clear that it had grown up by her side. Such an intimate magic beast would become the best assistant to its owner, and it would have absolute loyalty and teamwork. This was a partner that everyone envied. "It's not a kitten, it's actually a duckling, and it's not a magic beast, it's Ugly Duckling," Amy said as she looked at Dennis with an earnest expression. Ugly Duckling?" Dennis faltered slightly as he looked at Ugly Duckling in Amy's arms. No matter how he looked at it, it looked like a cat, not a duckling at all. Furthermore, it looked quite adorable. It wasn't ugly at all. All of the other mercenaries also wore peculiar expressions. They really couldn't keep up with this little girl's train of thought. However, it appeared that she didn't know what magic beast this was, either. Perhaps she had been raising it as an ordinary kitten all this time. After all, Meg was only a chef. Even hunters like them couldn't identify what magic beast this was, so there was no way that Meg would know. "However, I can tell you a little secret about Ugly Duckling, but you have to promise to keep it a secret," Amy said as she looked at everyone with a mysterious expression. A secret? All of the mercenaries were immediately intrigued. Could it be that Amy knew the true identity of this little kitten? Thus, They all nodded to express their willingness to keep it a secret. Even Evan, who was standing in the distance, came closer and listened intently. Ugly Duckling isn't actually an ordinary duckling. Amy looked at all of the mercenaries' eyes, and lowered her voice as she continued, its true identity is that of a little swan. When it grows up, it'll become a white swan, and when that time comes, it'll be able to fly into the sky. Heh! All of the mercenaries stared at Amy and the little kitten in her arms with dumbstruck expressions. Not only was it a duckling, but it was also a white swan. No matter how they looked at it, this little orange thing didn't look like it was going to grow into a white swan in the future. Mr. Meg, this mutant purple golden mink was caught by your pet, so it's yours. Its skin can be sold for a good price at the Mercenary Guild, Kywell said to Meg with a smile. Dennis and the others were rather envious, but they had no objections to Chiwell's words. Chapter 545. That's right, Big Sister Kywell, you've already forced it into a dead end. That purple golden mink was most likely scared to death by you and Evan. It has nothing to do with them, so why should we give the purple golden mink to them? Eva, who had just alighted from the horse-drawn carriage, chimed in. She looked at Evan lovingly, and wanted to get closer to him. All of the mercenaries turned to Evan and Eva with a hint of surprise in their eyes. They had all witnessed what had just happened, and Eva's argument was a little unreasonable. After the purple golden mink had gone berserk, even Chiwell's boomerang wouldn't be able to catch up to it. On top of that, Evan's magic posed no threat to it, so how could it have been scared to death by them? However, Eva was the little sister of the Rose Mercenary Squad, and she had always been spoiled by everyone. Furthermore, she was the only healer in the Mercenary Squad, so everyone had more or less received treatment from her. As such, they didn't know what to say and could only turn to Kywell. As for Evan's argument, they were indeed the ones who had chased the purple golden mink out, but it had indeed been scared to death by the orange kitten. By scaring the purple golden mink to death, they had actually saved Eva. Kywell must have considered this, which was why he had given all of the purple golden mink to Meg. However, he didn't think that Eva would be so ungrateful after being saved, and the atmosphere became a little awkward. Mag, who was about to say something courteous, glanced at Evan and Eva. This pair of adulterous couple were really birds of a feather. The woman was a scumbag, and the man was a scumbag. They were a match made in heaven. If it weren't for the fact that he and Amy were in the carriage, the purple golden mink definitely wouldn't have let Eva go. Perhaps no one else had noticed, but he had clearly seen what had happened. Evan clearly had an opportunity to attack the purple golden mink. Even if he couldn't trap it, as a third-tier magic caster, he would definitely be able to disrupt its progress and buy more time for his teammates. However, he did not do that. Instead, he stood on the tree and watched with a smile on his face. If there were only the two of them in the carriage, then Meg would only think that this fellow was a narrow-minded fellow. However, there was also this brainless fan in the carriage who worshipped him in every possible way. Yet, he had the attitude of watching a show and wanted to watch her die with him. He was simply inhumane. And now, this scumbag couple actually wanted to snatch the spoils of war. If it were just Kywell and the others, perhaps Meg would have offered to split the fur of this mutant purple golden mink according to how much effort they put in. This was a very common method of cooperation among mercenaries. But now, he changed his mind. Instead of giving it to these two guys, he might as well feed it to the dogs. In any case, he wouldn't leave any meat for them. Miss Flatchest, do you want to eat this big rat? I didn't think that you'd be so trustworthy. Ugly Duckling caught this big rat, and you want to eat it. I can ask Father to skin it for you. You can try it raw and tell me if it tastes good. Amy looked at Eva's expectant eyes, and shook Meg's hand as she said, Father, let's give this big rat to Miss Flatchest. I. Eva stared at Amy, and she didn't know how to respond. You're just rearing a magic beast that's the nemesis of the purple golden mink, and it's a little thing that hasn't even been weaned yet. In terms of power, do you think you can even touch a single hair on the purple golden mink? Furthermore, if it weren't for our Rose Mercenary Squad, you wouldn't even be able to see the purple golden mink, let alone hunt it down. You should know how much effort you put in, so do you really dare to take this purple golden mink fur? Evan turned to Meg as he spoke in a cold voice. His handsome face had darkened slightly, and he was leaning forward slightly to exert pressure on Meg with the wand in his hand. Chiwill's brows furrowed, and he was just about to say something when Meg took a step forward. He looked at Evan with a mocking smile, and said, "How much effort did you put in?" The purple golden mink was scared to death by Amy's ugly duckling, and prior to that, it hadn't been injured in the slightest. It had just entered a berserk state, and its speed was far superior to everyone's, so it had already escaped from the encirclement. Even though you took advantage of the opportunity to kill it, what does that have to do with you, whose attack was even blocked by a purple golden mink? Do you think you've put in a lot of effort just because you were standing on a tree and watching your teammates almost die at the hands of the purple golden mink? Evan's expression changed drastically upon hearing this, and he reflexively took a step back as a hint of panic flashed through his eyes. Evan's face had also paled significantly. The image of him standing on a tree with a smile on his face was still deeply etched in her mind. Now that Meg had exposed this to her, all of the self-consolation she had used to try and comfort herself instantly paled in comparison, and a hint of confusion appeared in her eyes as she looked at Evan. All of the mercenaries' expressions also changed upon hearing this. The situation had been quite tense, and no one had paid any attention to what had just happened. Thinking back, Evan did indeed have many opportunities to stop the purple golden mink, but he hadn't done anything during that time. If what Meg had said was true, then what was Evan trying to do? They didn't dare to think too deeply into this matter, as trust was the lifeblood of a mercenary group. If they couldn't even trust their teammates, then that would definitely be fatal. Meg looked at Evan with a mocking smile on his face. Meg Alex's forte lay in battle, and his specialty was verbal attacks. The lowest level of verbal attacks was hurling insults at one's enemies, and Meg disdained to do something like that. Killing someone in an elegant and unconventional manner was a true skill. For a team, trust in teammates was a very important thing. If there was someone hiding in the team who could stab you in the back when you needed help the most, it would be even harder to defend against a strong enemy. It was a big taboo. Chiwill's expression also became quite grave, and a contemplative look appeared in her eyes. She had been wondering why Evan hadn't intervened when they were pursuing the purple golden mink, but it seemed that Meg had seen something, and Eva's reaction seemed to confirm this as well. As such, her heart became quite heavy. Chapter 546. So Wizard Evan was preparing an intermediate spell? He wasn't just watching from the sidelines. He even mastered an intermediate spell. That's amazing. Eva's eyes lit up again as she looked at Evan. All of her disappointment was swept away. She turned to Mag and said, "That's right. You're just an outsider. What right do you have to criticize the members of our Rose mercenary squad? There's no way Master Evan is that kind of person." Meg glanced at Eva. This woman is incorrigible. She was sold off, yet she's still so happy. All right, let's leave this matter at that. Let's continue on our way. We have to reach the illusionary Mist Valley before noon. Kywell stood in the middle and looked into Eva's eyes with a serious expression. Eva, it was Mr. Meg and the others who saved your life. As a person, you should know how to repay a debt of gratitude. This is a basic principle that the Rose Mercenary Squad has always adhered to. I hope you'll remember that. Eva looked into Chiwill's eyes and opened her mouth. In the end, she lowered her head. Evan glanced at Kywell before turning to board the carriage. He shot a vicious glance at Meg out of the corner of his eye before closing his eyes and remaining silent. The other mercenaries also boarded their carriages. None of them expressed any opinions about this unpleasant episode. "Brother Meg, do you want me to help you remove this mink fur? I'm good at this." Sam walked up to Meg with a smile. "No need to trouble Brother Sam. As a chef, I'm pretty good at this too." Mag shook his head with a smile. For Sivir's sake, he couldn't be bothered to bicker with her. What did it have to do with him? He pulled out the sharp bull-slaying cleaver from his waist, and the tip of the cleaver slithered over the purple golden mink's body. Soon, the mink's fur was completely unscathed, and there was no excess flesh or blood on the back of the mink. The golden fur was soft and smooth, not prickly at all. A bright purple color extended from the middle to the tail, spreading to both sides, giving off a bright metallic luster. Normal purple golden mink fur sold for around 500 gold coins on the market, but perfect mutated purple golden mink fur could sell for at least 1,000 gold coins, or even more. Meg was also in need of money. If he took a day off from the restaurant, he would lose hundreds of thousands of copper coins. Naturally, he wouldn't be polite with such an unexpected windfall. Amazing, it's even cleaner than mine. It won't be a problem to sell it directly. It'll definitely fetch a good price. Sam exclaimed as he looked at the mink fur in Meg's hand. He then took out a water bag and washed Meg's hand and knife. Thank you. Meg climbed onto the horse-drawn carriage with the mink fur and skinned purple golden mink before sitting down in a corner with Amy in his arms again. The horse-drawn carriage continued onward. Eva looked at the skinned and bloody purple golden mink, and she reflexively withdrew her leg with a hint of fear and concern in her eyes. What was she going to do if this guy forced her to eat this terrifying rat? Mr. Mag, are you planning to eat this purple golden mink for lunch today? Dennis asked with a curious expression. I was planning to do that, but a young mistress just said that if Ugly Duckling could catch this rat, then she'd eat it raw. Hence, I have to ask this young mistress for her opinion before deciding whether we'll be able to eat it. After all, she was the one who reserved it first. Mag smiled at Eva. His smile was as kind as the uncle next door who asked if you wanted to eat fruit. Am I right, Miss Eva? However, this smile was like the smile of a demon in Eva's eyes. The sight of the skinned and bloody purple golden mink made her want to vomit. Even if it was cooked, she wouldn't want to touch it, let alone eat it raw. What she regretted the most was that she had just said those words. No, I don't want to eat that terrifying thing. Eva shook her head with a pale expression. Big sister Flatchest, I'm very disappointed in you. How could you go back on your word? I want to know if this rat tastes good raw. Amy looked at Eva with a disappointed expression as she held Ugly Duckling in her arms. Eva's face flushed with embarrassment, but she was willing to lose face compared to eating the purple golden mink raw, so she still shook her head firmly. Looks like we're in for a treat today. Meg smiled as he looked at the juicy purple golden mink with anticipation in his eyes. In his past life, he had eaten roasted bamboo rats, and the delicious flavor was still very vivid in his memory. The purple golden mink's meat was clearly far superior to that of bamboo rats, so it should be quite delicious if he were to roast it. After countless practice sessions in the test field for the god of cookery, Meg was now confident that he could roast different types of meat well. Even though he might not be able to roast them as well as beef kebabs, it shouldn't be too bad, either. This is the first time I've heard of roasted purple golden mink. However, there are 10 of us here, so one purple golden mink might not be enough. Why don't we get some other prey along the way? What do you want? Dennis asked with a smile as he looked at Meg. If possible, beef would be best, Meg replied without any hesitation. Will normal bison do as well? Sam asked. Sure. Meg nodded. That's easy. There's a bison ridge on the way to the illusionary mist valley, and there are many bison there. I'll get you one when we get there. Sam chuckled. Thank you for your help. Meg's eyes lit up. The best thing about traveling with an experienced hunter was that he knew exactly where the prey was. Ugly Duckling lay in Amy's arms for a while before crawling onto the purple golden mink fur and rolling around. It seemed to be very fond of this fur, or perhaps it was showing off its spoils of war. After passing by a mountain ridge, Sam stopped the horse-drawn carriage and led Dennis into the forest. Not long after that, Dennis emerged from the forest with a huge, four-legged black bison on his back. The bison's eyes were wide with horror, and it didn't dare to move in the slightest on Dennis's back. Dennis tossed the bison onto the ground before turning to Kywil, and saying, Team leader, the illusionary mist valley is up ahead. Why don't we go there after lunch? Sure. Kywil took a glance at the huge bison. It would most likely take a lot of time just to take care of it. There's a mountain spring up ahead, let's take care of this bison there. Meg stood up and looked around before pointing at a mountain spring nearby. A small stream flowed slowly past the side of the road, and there was a large pond at the mouth of the mountain spring. The clear water of the mountain spring reflected the bright blue sky. All right. Dennis picked up the bison with one hand before making his way toward the mountain spring. The horse-drawn carriage also continued onward before stopping beside the mountain spring. Dennis kicked the struggling bison over as he turned to Meg with a smile, and asked, "Mr. Meg, do you need us to slaughter this bison for you?" "No need. If you can, just get me some firewood. Leave the rest to me." Meg shook his head as he jumped off the carriage and walked toward the bison. He pressed down on the bison's horns as it shook its head, and the bull-slaughtering knife in his right hand slit the bison's neck. Blood spurted out as he looked up at Evan, who was sitting in the carriage. Evan also happened to look at Meg, and their gazes met in midair. He felt as if his heart had stopped for 3 seconds, and he could feel the killing intent in Meg's eyes. It was only a bison that had died, but he felt an inexplicable sense of fear. "Eva, aren't you getting off the carriage?" Kyle jumped off the carriage and asked Eva, who was sitting in the corner. Chapter 547. I'll go look for some wild fruits. Evan jumped down from the carriage and dashed into the forest, quickly disappearing from everyone's sight. He clearly didn't want to eat Meg's food either. That glance just now had made his heart palpitate inexplicably, and he subconsciously wanted to distance himself from Meg. Meg naturally didn't have any objections to this. He didn't want to cook for them in the first place, so this was just what he wanted. After draining the bison's blood, Meg suddenly thought of something. He turned to Sam and said, "Brother Sam, you're familiar with this area. Can you get me a bamboo stick? I want to cut it into skewers and use it for roast beef kebabs." "That's easy. I'll get it for you right away." Sam nodded and turned to climb up the mountain. "Roast beef kebabs? Brother Meg, beef should be eaten in large mouthfuls. Won't it be too stingy if you make it into kebabs?" Dennis asked with a hint of worry in his voice. "If one kebab isn't enough, then I'll eat a few more. Such a large bison will definitely be enough to eat," Meg said with a smile. The bull-slaughtering knife in his hand nimbly dissected the bison. The knife slid through the meat without touching the bones at all. His movements were smooth and pleasing to the eye. What a powerful knife skill. Without years of hard work, it would be impossible to master such a knife skill, right? Kyle couldn't help but praise Meg in his heart as he watched Meg's skillful movements. She was also a little entranced by Meg's focused expression. She seemed to see the shadow of someone in him, and it constantly stirred up memories in the depths of her heart. The surrounding mercenaries also had expressions of admiration on their faces. In terms of strength, Meg might not be as good as them, but his exquisite and skillful knife skills were truly skillful. His control of the knife was just too strong. "Father, can Meg also eat a lot of kebabs?" Amy looked up at Meg expectantly and asked. "Yes, of course, Amy can eat as much as she wants." Meg looked at Amy dotingly and nodded. After processing the beef, Meg estimated everyone's appetite. In addition to the beef, he also cut off 2 large pieces of beef tenderloin and washed them with the mountain spring water. Then, he began to take out all kinds of spices and condiments from his backpack. He even brought out a folding grill. Meg had bargained with the system to buy it while he was on the road. Barbecuing in the wild could be done with local ingredients, but the grill had to be carefully chosen. Otherwise, the smoke and fire, as well as the uncontrollable temperature, would greatly affect the quality of the barbecued meat. Mr. Mag, all of the other mercenaries don't have to pack too much when they're out on missions, and they're only carrying life-saving items with them. But you're carrying an entire kitchen with you. Dennis couldn't help but grumble as he looked at Mag's pile of items with a peculiar expression. "I'm taking care of a child, so of course I have to prepare more things." Meg opened the kettle and poured a glass of water for Amy. He then poured some spring water for Ugly Duckling to drink, and began to marinate the beef in a large paper bag. "Little brother Meg is really a good father. My little boy is about the same age as this little girl, and he wants to go to the wild with me every day, but I've never taken him out even once." Scott gave Meg a thumbs up with an emotional expression. "When he grows up, he'll know that you're a good father, brother Scott." Meg stopped what he was doing and looked up at Scott with a smile. After all, not everyone's child was a 4th-tier magic caster. Taking him to the wild would be like taking him to hell. Let's hope so. A smile also appeared on Scott's face. Meg began to prepare the roast beef step by step, while the mercenaries sat on the ground and chatted with one another as they looked on in surprise at Meg preparing the roast meat in a way that they had never seen before. The process was so complicated that even these mercenaries, who usually relied on dry rations, couldn't help but feel a little confused. After all, when they roasted their own meat, they would just brush some oil on it and put it directly over the fire. They would sprinkle some salt on it when it was about to be cooked. The taste was up to fate. Sometimes it tasted good, and sometimes it would accidentally burn. However, taste wasn't the most important thing to them. In the wild, safety and efficiency were the most important things. If they had to eat like Meg every single time, then they wouldn't have any time to do missions. However, it was rare for them to be able to enjoy food cooked by a professional chef in the wild, so they were all looking forward to it. Sam quickly returned with a large green bamboo stick. At Mag's request, the bamboo stick was sliced into many skewers, upon which marinated beef and purple golden mink meat were skewered. The wood was then burned into charcoal, and all of the skewers were placed into an oven constructed from stone before being roasted on a rack. All of the mercenaries fell silent as they stared intently at Meg. Watching him cook was like watching a spectacular performance, and every step of his cooking was very pleasing to the eye. Even though they couldn't understand why a simple roast meat had to be divided into so many steps, they couldn't help but look forward to seeing just how delicious such an intricate roast beef kebab would be. The kebab definitely won't taste good if it's all fancy and fancy. Eva looked at Mag's departing figure as she took a bite of the coarse grain biscuit in her hand. She then gulped down a large mouthful of water before swallowing the dry and hard biscuit as she thought to herself with certainty. Evan flew back with a few oranges in his hand before landing back onto the horse-drawn carriage. He handed 2 oranges to Eva with a smile, and said, "Have some, Eva. These are freshly picked oranges." "Thank you, Master Evan." Eva accepted the oranges with an elated expression before carefully cradling them in front of her chest as if she had received something extremely precious. "You're welcome." A hint of disgust flashed through Evan's eyes, but he still maintained a smile on his face. His brows furrowed slightly at the sight of Meg being surrounded by all of the mercenaries. His gaze then fell upon the expectant Kywil, and the veins on his forehead bulged as he slowly clenched his fists. Now that everything was ready, Meg reached out to test the temperature before grabbing a handful of kebabs and placing them onto the grill. A sizzling sound rang out as the kebabs were placed onto the hot grill. The fiery red charcoal provided the roaring heat, and the snowflake-like fatty meat on the surface of the kebabs quickly changed color. The snowflakes became translucent, and the oil sizzled out. A faint aroma of beef began to waft through the air, and it was becoming more and more intense. The mercenaries' eyes gradually lit up, and they couldn't help but take a few deep breaths. Meg skillfully flipped over the kebabs on the grill, and when the kebabs were about 70% done, he picked up a brush and brushed a layer of sauce onto the surface of the kebabs. This sauce was like a catalyst bomb, and it instantly caused the already rich aroma of the kebabs to explode. The aroma of the kebabs was mixed with the aroma of spices, and it spread out in all directions. "It smells so good." Dennis looked at the kebabs on the grill with an incredulous expression. "What an alluring aroma. Is this really the aroma of kebabs?" Kywil took a deep breath, and an intoxicated expression appeared on his face. Chapter 548. Wow, it smells so good. The sizzling beef looks so delicious. Amy stood on her tiptoes as she stared at the kebab in Meg's hands with anticipation in her eyes. Ugly Duckling's interest was also piqued. It pricked up its ears and craned its neck in an attempt to catch a glimpse of the source of this alluring aroma. The alluring aroma wafted through the air, and the sound of gulping could be heard all over the place. All of the mercenaries were staring at the kebabs on the grill with wide eyes. If it weren't for the fact that they were still able to maintain their composure, they would have most likely already rushed forward to snatch the kebabs. Meg handed a kebab to Amy with a smile, and said, "All right, let's give the first kebab to our adorable Amy." "Thank you, Father." Amy's eyes immediately lit up, and she placed Ugly Duckling down onto the ground. She accepted the kebab with elation, and was just about to place it into her mouth when it sizzled with oil. "It's very hot. Blow on it before you eat," Meg hurriedly reminded. "All right." Remi suddenly stopped and obediently responded. She held the bamboo skewer with both hands and put it in front of her mouth with a serious expression. She pouted her little mouth and blew on it. Then she opened her pink little mouth and took a bite of the top piece of beef. All of the mercenaries looked on with bated breath as Amy bit into the tender, oily beef. Her intricate little face immediately lit up, and her bright blue eyes narrowed into crescents. She was completely unable to resist the blissful feeling of deliciousness as she chewed on the beef with elation. She then swallowed, and there was still some oil and sauce remaining at the corners of her mouth. Gulp. The sound of gulping erupted almost in unison. "Does it have to be so delicious? I can't help it." All of the mercenaries looked at one another with slightly awkward expressions, but they were all in the same mood. They quickly turned their gazes toward the kebab in Meg's hands with yearning looks on their faces. "That little brat must be lying. It definitely doesn't taste good. The tangerines that Master Evan gave me are the best." Eva's hand faltered in the middle of peeling the tangerine, but she quickly put a piece of tangerine into her mouth, only to find that it was a little sour. Evan also forcibly withdrew his gaze and looked into the distance. He also swallowed his saliva with a calm expression as he placed a piece of tangerine into his mouth. "Let's eat, everyone. The kebab's going to take some time to cook, so you can sit down." Mag distributed the kebabs to everyone with a smile, and each of them received 2 kebabs. He also left a kebab for Ugly Duckling, which was crying anxiously on the ground, and placed a new kebab in a clean bowl before continuing to roast it. "Oh, my God, how can this kebab's kebab? This is..." Dennis took 3 bites of the beef before swallowing them in large mouthfuls, and he stared at the kebab in his hand with incredulity etched on his face. "This is a delicacy that only heavenly gods can taste, right? How can it be so delicious? How can kebab's kebab be so tender? And the taste is so delicious." Sydney sat down on a nearby tree branch with a kebab in his hand. He took another large bite of the kebab, and closed his eyes to savor the delicious flavor spreading through his mouth. It felt as if he were in a dream. Scott and the others also wore similar expressions. They were completely immersed in the kebab's deliciousness after just 1 bite. They didn't think that such a small kebab could be so magical. Kywell looked at everyone, and his gaze was also drawn to the kebab in his hand. He blew on it a few times, and then bit down on the topmost piece of beef. The oil had already cooled down, but the kebab was still a little hot. The flavor of the kebab hadn't yet seeped out, but the savory sauce on the kebab's surface had already stimulated his taste buds. The tender, juicy piece of beef melted in his mouth. The seasoning had already completely seeped into the kebab's flavor, and together with the rich sauce, the kebab's flavor reached a whole new level. Kywell couldn't help but close his eyes. The kebab's meat was extraordinarily tender, and the fat between the kebab wasn't greasy. Instead, it made the kebab's kebab even more tender, and the rich sauce didn't overpower the kebab's flavor. Instead, it served as a perfect accompaniment to bring out the kebab's flavor to the extreme. Is it delicious? No, it's extremely delicious. Kywell felt as if he had arrived at a vast grassland. Herds of bison were strolling leisurely on the lush green grass, and a little girl was sitting on the back of one of them. A red-haired man was carrying a long saber on his shoulder, and he was following her from a distance. The little girl's laughter echoed throughout the grassland, and the man's scarred face was also wearing a smile. Night fell, and they lit a bonfire on the grassland. The man was roasting large pieces of beef over the fire, and the little girl was sitting beside him with an expectant look on her face. She was waiting for the man to hand her the slightly charred beef, and she was happily eating it. This was the most delicious kebab in the world. A tear rolled down from the corner of Chiwell's eye. She turned her face away and wiped the tear from the corner of her eye. She looked at the kebab in her hand, then at Meg and Amy, who was happily eating kebab. She could feel the aura of fatherly love, and it touched the softest part of her heart. She opened her mouth and exhaled gently, as if she wanted to exhale the hot air, leaving only the aftertaste in her mouth. A smile appeared on her face, and she opened her mouth to take another bite of the kebab. She closed her eyes and enjoyed the taste of the kebab in her mouth, as well as the love that she hadn't felt for many years. Kebab after kebab was cooked, and then they were distributed by Meg to the waiting mercenaries. Everyone had blissful smiles on their faces, and they couldn't stop praising Meg's cooking skills and the kebab's delicious kebab. Meg also had a smile on his face, and he felt a sense of accomplishment as he watched everyone being completely conquered by his food. This kind of wonderful thing happened every day, and he had never experienced anything like this in his previous life. Evan, try this kebab. It's unbelievably delicious. Scott walked over to the horse-drawn carriage with 2 kebabs in his hand, and handed one of them to Evan with a smile. I won't eat this strange thing. Evan raised his hand with a slightly gloomy expression, and the kebab was sent flying. The kebab was nailed to a tree by the roadside, and the kebab was still wobbling slightly. Scott looked at the kebab and the gloomy expression on Evan's face, and knew that he was in a bad mood because of what had happened before, so he didn't say anything. Instead, he handed the other kebab to Eva, and said, Eva, do you want to try it? Chapter 549. What a poor kid, he made such a stupid decision. If he misses this opportunity, he'll never get another chance to taste father's cooking again. Amy looked at Eva and Evan with a sympathetic expression before taking a big bite of the beef, and a joyful smile appeared on her face again. Meg looked at the beef kebab nailed to the tree, and was a little disappointed that the fruits of his labor had gone to waste. He then turned to Evan and Eva, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. Those two must be having a hard time holding back their hunger. After over an hour, almost half of the beef was in everyone's stomachs. Meg didn't rest at all, and only at the very end did he have time to eat a few kebabs. The 2-centimeter cube of beef was just enough to fill his mouth. The tender beef was enshrouded in delicious sauce, and it melted into the most delicious flavor in his mouth. His taste buds and every single cell in his body opened up, and a sense of satisfaction welled up in his heart. It was better than any beef he had ever tasted in the past. And this is only ordinary wild beef. If it were a top-grade ironhide bull, the texture and deliciousness would most likely be elevated to another level. Today's meal was a taste test, and the response was quite good. Looks like it's going to be another popular dish in the restaurant. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he looked at the beef kebab in his hand. Furthermore, he had repaid the favor of the purple golden mink fur. After all, everyone had eaten at least 10 kebabs, and Meg was already planning to set the price at 300 copper coins. At the very least, it would be slightly more expensive than the tofu pudding, right? This is the most delicious meal I've ever had in the wilderness as a mercenary. Dennis wiped his mouth with a genuine expression of praise. Burp. This is the most delicious meal I've ever had in my life. Skull burped with a bashful smile. Monkey jumped down from a nearby tree, and turned to Meg with an expectant expression. Say, Big Brother Meg, how about you join our Rose mercenary squad? You'll cook for us every day, and we'll take care of the missions. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. That way, we'll be able to eat delicious food every day in the wastelands. Sam clapped his hands. All of the mercenaries also turned to Mag with expectant looks in their eyes. Even Sivir was looking at Mag with a hint of interest in her eyes. I'm sorry, but my main job is still to run the restaurant and cook. Gathering ingredients is just an occasional activity, so I can't join your mercenary group. If you still want to eat my food, you can go to Mammoth in the Aiden Square. That's my restaurant. Meg smiled and shook his head. He had no intention of becoming a mercenary. A life of bloodshed was not suitable for a stay-at-home dad like him. I see. The mercenaries looked disappointed. Monkey scratched his head and wanted to say something. All right, Mr. Meg is still taking care of little Amy, so it's not a good time for you to become a mercenary. Besides, we don't have the time to spend 2 hours in the wastelands every day to have a meal. Let's go to Mr. Meg's restaurant when we have a break. Kywell smiled as he looked at Meg, and praised, You're a very good chef. You're too kind. Meg nodded slightly, and his mood became even better. All right, then I'll definitely go to Big Brother Meg's restaurant during this break. Since we're so close, can you give me a discount? Monkey looked at Meg with a smile. The restaurant doesn't give discounts to anyone, but it's my basic requirement to make sure that every customer feels like they're getting their money's worth, Meg said with a smile. If someone else had said that, I would definitely think that they were bragging, but since you're the one who said that, I believe you. Dennis gave Meg a thumbs up. Chiwill's smile faded, and a serious expression appeared on his face as he said, "All right, we've wasted a lot of time with lunch, so it's time for us to continue our journey. It'll only take half an hour to reach the illusionary Mist Valley from here, so let's all rest up and prepare for the upcoming battle." Yes. All of the mercenaries nodded in response before checking their equipment. They then placed the remaining half of the boule onto the horse-drawn carriage, and prepared to continue their journey. Evan said that he had to go check out the situation first, so he left first. Meg quickly put away all of the bottles that he had brought with him, washed his hands, and also got onto the horse-drawn carriage with Amy and Ugly Duckling in his arms. They were about to reach the illusionary Mist Valley, and their battle was about to begin. He was determined to capture an Ironhide Boule today as the mission reward was simply too tempting. Ding! The system is warning the host that the mission to capture the Ironhide Boule must be completed by the host on his own. If the host relies on the assistance of others, the system will deem the mission a failure, and the host will be punished. The system's stern voice sounded in an implacable manner. "All right, I understand. I don't plan to travel with them anyway. There are so many of them, and it'll be difficult to split the spoils." Meg rolled his eyes internally. Judging from the teamwork of the Rose mercenary squad, he could tell that Chiwill was the most powerful among them. However, she hadn't even reached the 4th tier yet. Even though it was already quite impressive that she had reached this level of power at her age, objectively speaking, she still wasn't as powerful as Amy in battle. The system is warning the host once again, the use of unconventional weapons during the mission is strictly prohibited. The system's voice became even more serious. "Big Brother Sam, how are the Ironhide Bulls distributed in the illusionary Mist Valley? Are they everywhere?" Meg chose to ignore the system as he turned to Sam with a question. "Of course not. There are Ironhide Bulls in the illusionary Mist Valley, but they've all been hunted and killed over the years, so their numbers have become very sparse. It's all down to luck whether or not you'll encounter one. Furthermore, the illusionary Mist Valley is very vast, and it's enshrouded in mist all year round, so visibility is extremely low. Aside from the Ironhide Bulls, there are also other magic beasts that roam the valley, so it's extremely dangerous. Also, it's very easy for unfamiliar people to get lost in the mist, which is very lethal in the wilderness." Sam shook his head as he looked at Meg with a serious expression, and said, "Hence, I suggest that you don't take little Amy into the illusionary Mist Valley. It's known to be a man-eating mist." "All right, I'll think about it." Meg nodded with a grim expression. It appeared that the situation in the illusionary Mist Valley was even more complicated than he had imagined. After traveling for a while, a thought suddenly occurred to Meg, and he hurriedly asked, "Oh, right, I think I forgot to take my grill. Can you stop the carriage so I can go back and get it?" Monkey turned to Meg and asked, "Do you need me to turn the carriage around and get it for you?" "There's no need for that. It's only a corner away, so I'll be back soon." Meg put down his backpack before quickly making his way back. This grill had cost him $100, and it was a must-have for traveling, so it would be a pity to throw it away. Chapter 550. The person sitting on the tree branch was none other than Evan, who had said that he was going to check out the situation in advance. He was holding a beef kebab that he had just plucked from the tree branch, and he was sniffing it with his nose. An intoxicated look appeared on his face, and his expression was focused and solemn. He didn't notice Meg in the distance at all. "Should I eat it or not? Is it really as good as they say it is?" Evan's expression was a little conflicted. After hesitating momentarily, he couldn't help but take a bite of the beef, and his expression immediately lit up. The beef was still slightly warm, and the delicious sauce wrapped around the tender beef. It had already exceeded all of his expectations of beef. "Is this really beef? What an incredible flavor! How can there be such delicious food in this world? How can there be such delicious beef?" Evan couldn't help but roar in his heart. In that instant, He had completely forgotten that this beef was cooked by the guy who had humiliated him so much. He had also forgotten that this was the beef kebab that he had slapped away from the tree. There was no other such delicious beef in this world. Is it good? A voice suddenly sounded. It's delicious. Evan nodded sincerely. His expression then abruptly changed, and he abruptly opened his eyes to look down. Meg was standing under the tree, looking down at him with a mocking smile on his face. The air suddenly fell silent. Evan sat on the tree branch with a stiff expression, holding an unfinished beef kebab. Meg was also standing under the tree, looking up at him. Evan had just mocked Meg, slapped the beef kebab away, and declared that he definitely wouldn't eat it. Now, he had secretly turned around to pick up the beef kebab on the tree, and was caught by Meg. What was even more embarrassing was that he had admitted to eating it himself. How delicious. In that instant, Evan was even contemplating suicide. Perhaps he should find a hole in the ground to hide in and never come out again. Take your time, then. I'm going to go now. They're still waiting for me. Satisfied with the answer, Meg turned around with a smile, picked up his grill plate, and left. This feeling was even more satisfying than slapping him in the face. That bastard. Evan looked at Meg's departing figure, and the veins on his hand bulged as he gripped onto his wand. However, he hesitated momentarily before slowly lowering his hand. At such a close distance, Kywil and the others would definitely be alerted if he were to attack. Furthermore, they were very familiar with one another, so they would be able to easily identify the culprit. Meg put down his hand from the scabbard at his waist. It was as he had expected. However, he still quickened his pace. After all, the other party was still waiting for him. Evan was the only one left in the room. He looked at the kebab in his hand and wanted to throw it away, but his hand stopped in mid-air. His throat moved, and he hesitated for a long time before slowly putting it down and taking a bite of the second piece of beef. I'm so angry. But, it's so delicious. Why is this guy's beef so delicious? Evan finished the kebab in his hand with a pained yet blissful expression on his face. He tossed the skewer in his hand aside with a hint of longing for more. However, a conflicted look appeared on his face as he looked at the road ahead. If that guy were to tell Kywil and the others about this, then things would be very awkward. What's wrong, Mr. Meg? Did you pick up any money on the way back? Why are you so happy? Dennis couldn't help but ask with a curious expression at the sight of Meg, who was smiling the entire time. I didn't pick up any money. I just saw a monkey stealing food, and I thought it was a little funny. Meg shook his head with a smile. He didn't say anything, not because he wanted to save Evan's face, but because he didn't think there was a need to waste time on something so trivial. I didn't steal any food. Don't accuse me like that, the monkey protested with a stern expression, drawing raucous laughter from everyone. The horse-drawn carriage continued onward. Sam could see that Meg still hadn't given up on entering the illusionary mist valley, so he enthusiastically explained to Meg all of the things that he had to look out for in the illusionary mist valley, as well as all types of emergency escape methods. Meg listened intently and committed all of the information to memory. Aside from ironhide bulls, there were also occasional fifth-tier magic beasts that appeared in the illusionary mist valley. For Meg and Amy, that would be very dangerous, and could even be fatal. After all, Amy was only a fourth-tier magic caster, and the Prophecy Stone's random critical strike rate was far too high. They couldn't place all of their bets on that, so following the advice of a veteran hunter who had entered the illusionary mist valley on multiple occasions was clearly a very good choice. Mr. Meg, we'll stop the horse-drawn carriage here. If you need a ride back to Chaos City in the evening, you can wait for us here. Half an hour later, the horse-drawn carriage stopped outside a massive valley enshrouded in mist, and Kywil turned to Meg. All right, thank you. Meg stepped out of the carriage with Amy and Ugly Duckling in his arms, and nodded with a smile. They had spent so much time on this journey, so they were naturally going to hitch a ride back. All of the mercenaries disembarked from the horse-drawn carriage, and packed up their equipment before bidding farewell to Meg and Amy. Monkey led the way into the valley, and soon disappeared into the mist, followed by Dennis and the others. If we enter the illusionary mist valley, that guy will most likely die, right? Evan also just so happened to return to the group, and he glowered at Meg before following everyone into the valley. Kywell turned to Meg with a serious expression, and said, "If you only need a portion of Ironhide bull meat, then perhaps we can help you. There's no need for you to take such a risk, Amy is still a child." Meg laid a hand on Amy's head as he looked at Kywell with a firm expression, and said, "Everyone has their own job and things that they have to do. As her father, I'll protect her." Kywell couldn't help but recall the man who liked to place his hand on his head, as well as the phrase "I'll protect you" that he would often say. It was just as reassuring, and he nodded as he said, "I wish you good luck." He then quickly caught up with the group. "Goodbye, big sister Kywell." Amy waved at Chiwell's departing figure. "Goodbye." Kywell waved at them with his back to them before disappearing into the mist of the valley. "Father, are we going to enter this valley to catch some Ironhide bull meat?" Amy looked up at Meg with an excited expression. "That's right. That's our most important goal today. We're going to use the Ironhide bull meat in the illusionary mist valley to make even more delicious kebabs." Meg nodded with a smile. "Even more delicious? Even more delicious than the kebabs we had for lunch?" Amy's eyes lit up with incredulity. "That's right, even more delicious than the kebabs we had for lunch." Meg nodded with a firm expression as he held onto Amy's little hand and led her toward the valley. At the same time, he said internally, "System, can you fix the GPS tracking system? If you really can't do it, will you sell the compass? Why isn't he opening the door yet? How long is he going to hide for? I know that my Ricky's rotisserie is renowned throughout the Aden Square, but never would I have thought that he would abandon his restaurant in order to avoid my challenge." Outside Amy's, Ricky stood on the staircase and yelled at the customers who were preparing to leave in disappointment after seeing the announcement. "Is there something wrong with that guy's brain?" The customers all looked at Ricky as if he were an idiot. Ricky was enraged by the customers' stares, and he gritted his teeth as he yelled, "In that case, I'm going to raise the stakes. I'm putting all of my dignity on the line for this competition. If I lose, I'll kowtow to him 10 times and call him father 3 times. If the owner of Amy's loses, he'll have to do the same thing." Chapter 551. The Rose Mercenary Squad advanced into the illusionary mist valley in an orderly manner. Monkey flashed through the mist in an agile manner, occasionally letting out a short whistle as a signal. Dennis and Skoll followed closely behind him. The two of them were extremely powerful meat shields who could keep out any unexpected dangers at the front and provide more space for the rear to attack. Meanwhile, Kywell stayed at the rear of the group, keeping a lookout for any potential dangers that might appear behind them. As the outskirts of the wilderness, the illusionary mist valley was an area that they frequently explored, so they were very familiar with the terrain and environment. However, the magic beasts in the wilderness never stayed in the same place. High-tier magic beasts could appear even in the outskirts of the wilderness, let alone in the illusionary mist valley. A single 5th-tier magic beast could very well lead to the annihilation of their entire mercenary squad, so they couldn't be too careful. Their target today was the Ironhide bull. They had encountered Ironhide bulls a few times in the illusionary mist valley in the past, but such a massive beast was not to be trifled with. Without a suitable buyer willing to pay a high price for it, it wasn't worth the risk and time to capture it. As such, they generally avoided it from afar. However, they had come here specifically for the Ironhide bull on this day, so they couldn't find it immediately, so they could only continue their search. Time gradually passed, and Eva was the first to grow impatient as she asked in a quiet voice, "Is there a chance that we won't be able to find the Ironhide bull today? Don't be in such a hurry. Hunting for prey requires patience, and the most important thing in the wilderness is to remain vigilant at all times. Otherwise, you could become the prey of a magic beast before you even find it." Sam abruptly thrust his pitchfork downward, pinning a venomous black snake that was trying to bite Eva's ankle to the ground. The snake's tail slithered up the pitchfork twice, and it died after a short while. Eva immediately withdrew her foot and shuffled closer to Evan with a pale expression. She had clearly been given a fright, and she nodded in a stuttering manner. I understand. Whoosh whoosh tilde. Right at this moment, a slightly long whistle sounded, and all of the mercenaries' eyes immediately lit up. The target has appeared, so prepare for battle. Sam, go and set up the traps. Skoll, you're responsible for assisting Sam. Eva, stay with Sam and the others. Everyone else, spread out and lure the Ironhide Bull into the traps according to our normal plan. Before that, let's try to exhaust its stamina as much as possible. The bounty this time is for the entire Ironhide Bull, so it's best not to inflict too many wounds on it, Kywell quickly said as he rushed toward the source of the whistle. Sam pondered for a moment before leading Skoll and Eva toward a valley off to the side. The terrain there was quite suitable for setting up large traps, and with Skoll's help, it shouldn't be an issue for them to dig a pit large enough to trap an Ironhide Bull. Sivir and the others rushed in the direction of the whistle, and soon, they heard a series of heavy footsteps coming their way. The ground was trembling slightly, and it was as if an enormous creature was coming their way. It's here. Spread out and don't clash with it head-on. A 4th-tier Ironhide Bull is extremely powerful, and there aren't any trees in the illusionary mist valley that can slow it down. If it picks up speed, it'll be very difficult for us to escape. Sam's traps won't be able to trap an Ironhide Bull at its peak in a short period of time. Hence, we're going to use a bullfight tactic to exhaust its stamina before luring it toward Sam and the others. Be careful, everyone. Kywell looked at Monkey, who was the first to rush out of the mist, and everyone immediately dispersed into the mist. They searched for a few tall rocks or hills that would provide them with some form of protection in the upcoming bullfight. Captain, it's a big guy. Monkey yelled as he scrambled onto a nearby mountain. A massive black Ironhide Bull that was over 5 meters in length also rushed out of the mist before crashing headfirst into the mountain. The mountain tremored violently, and black rocks began to fall from the sky. Monkey, who was holding onto a rock with one hand, almost fell to the ground. He tried to evade left and right, but a rock still struck him in the head, sending some blood gushing forth. Monkey, are you all right? Kywell hurriedly asked. All of the other mercenaries also wore concerned expressions on their faces. It's not a big deal, it just hurts a little. Also, my eyes are covered up, so I might have to take care of that first. Monkey's sharp intake of breath sounded. All right, you stay there and leave the rest to us. Kywell was slightly relieved upon hearing this. He looked at the Ironhide Bull before hurling the boomerang hanging from his waist through the air. The boomerang struck the Ironhide Bull's neck with a dull thump, as if it had struck a piece of metal. It then flew back before landing in Chiwell's hand again. There was only a small dent and a white mark on its neck. The 4th-tier magic beast, Ironhide Bulls, was most renowned for its steel-like hide. This was an excellent material for soft armor, and it would be very difficult for a 3rd-tier Kywell to break through its defenses. In the Rose mercenary squad, Evan was most likely the only one who could pose a threat to it. However, Sivir's attack had still successfully attracted the Ironhide Bull's attention. It turned its head to look at Sivir with its massive eyes, and white smoke was blowing out of its nostrils as it charged toward Sivir at an accelerated rate. Kywell turned around and began to run in a zigzag manner. He was always able to evade the Ironhide Bull before it crashed into him, and he would lash his whip backward from time to further enrage the Ironhide Bull. Dennis and the others also began to harass the Ironhide Bull, causing it to jump up and down. Even though they weren't able to inflict any substantial damage on it, they were quickly able to expend a lot of its energy, and its charging speed had already slowed down. However, its eyes were extremely bloodshot, and it glared at Kywell with bloodshot eyes before charging toward Kywell again. All of the mercenaries had also expended a lot of energy, but all of them wore smiles on their faces. According to the current situation, it wouldn't be long before this Ironhide Bull ran out of energy. Sam and the others should also be almost done setting up their traps, so it looked like their mission for the day had been quite successful. However, right at this moment, the sound of approaching footsteps drew everyone's attention, and they all turned toward that direction with bewilderment in their eyes. Crap! There's another Ironhide Bull. Be careful, everyone. Get out of the way. Monkey, who was using a piece of cloth to tie his wound with a rock, narrowed his eyes and looked into the fog. His expression changed as he shouted. Retreat. Spread out. Lure this Ironhide Bull toward Sam. Chiwell's expression also changed upon hearing this, and he immediately charged toward the ironhide bull. He had to lure it away. Otherwise, 2 4th-tier magic beasts would spell disaster for the Rose mercenary squad. Chapter 552. A massive ironhide bull that was over 6 meters in length charged out of the mist before crashing head-on into a boomerang. Thump! A muffled thump erupted as the boomerang was sent flying back at an even faster speed. The ironhide bull was only slowed down slightly, but it was still charging toward Kywil at an extremely fast speed. 5 massive icicles converged into a line before descending from the sky toward the ironhide bull's head. The ironhide bull raised its head and let loose a roar before whipping its massive horns to shatter the icicles with ease. However, its speed was also slowed down slightly as a result, and it changed its target from Kywil to Evan. It could sense an even more detestable aura from this guy, so it turned to charge toward him instead. "Look out!" Kywil let loose a faint cry as he lashed out with his whip, which latched onto the bull's horns. He then coiled the whip around a large tree, and the whip only lasted for a short while before snapping in half. The ironhide bull was slowed down slightly, but it was even more enraged, and its eyes also became bloodshot. Meanwhile, the other ironhide bull was being lured by Dennis and Scott toward the traps that Sam and the others had set up. "Let's run in the opposite direction and let them take care of the other one first." Kywil immediately made a decision as he hurled his boomerang toward the other direction. Evan nodded before tossing out a few more icicles. Even though they couldn't inflict any substantial damage to the ironhide bull, they were still able to disrupt it slightly, and it also began to run in the opposite direction as Kywil. However, after breaking through Evan's spell, the ironhide bull immediately stopped in its tracks. It looked at Evan and Kywil, then at the other ironhide bull that was about to disappear into the mist. It hesitated momentarily before accelerating in pursuit of the ironhide bull. Chiwil's expression changed drastically as he turned around and chased after the ironhide bull. "Crap! That guy isn't falling for my trap. It's most likely a pair with that ironhide bull. If that's the case, Sam and the others are in danger." Evan also turned around and dashed into the mist. He took a shortcut towards the trap. Because of Meg, he had become a suspect in the group. Now, he had to fix this. Otherwise, he could no longer stay in the Rose mercenary group. "Father, did you hear that? There seems to be a lot of commotion over there," Amy said as she pointed to the right. Ugly Duckling also pricked up its ears. Meg pressed down hard on the ground with the insecticide in his hand. He watched as a large poisonous scorpion turned over while foaming at its mouth. He nodded in satisfaction and looked in that direction. He tilted his head and listened attentively. There was indeed quite a lot of commotion coming from that direction. It seemed that some kind of large animal was running. The ground was trembling slightly, and they could also hear some shouts. It was most likely a mercenary group that was hunting. "I think I heard Uncle Oxhead's voice." Amy's eyes lit up. "Let's go take a look. It sounds like they're in trouble." Meg picked up Amy and held the bottle of insecticide in his hand as he quickly made his way toward that direction. He had bought the insecticide from the system. It was an enhanced version of the insecticide that could insta-kill all poisonous insects and creatures. It was one of the best items for traveling in the wilderness, and most importantly, it was completely harmless. Only the system could come up with something like this. Furthermore, Meg had also obtained a north compass. The magnetic field of the Norland continent was completely different from that of Earth. As for how the North Compass system had come up with this, Meg didn't ask. After all, it was already very angry that he had refused to purchase a satellite from it. The simultaneous appearance of 2 bronze-skinned bison had completely ruined the Rose mercenary squad's plan. It was far beyond their ability to deal with. In the illusionary Mist Valley, where it was difficult to find shelter, this was practically a disaster. Dennis and the others quickly sensed the other bronze-skinned bison behind them. The one behind them hadn't reached its limit yet. If there was another one, Sam's trap wouldn't be able to stop it. The most likely scenario was that they wouldn't be able to catch either of the two. Of course, the key now was not how to catch the 2 bronze-skinned bison, but how to let the Rose mercenary squad escape unscathed while paying the lowest price. "They are here." When Sam heard the sound, he signaled for Skoll to quickly climb out of the hole. A 3-meter deep and 5-meter long hole had already appeared in front of them. It was just that they had arrived earlier than they had expected. Otherwise, they would have dug a 6-meter deep hole. That way, they would have been able to complete today's mission. However, there wasn't enough time now, so he could only lay down the branches and grass that he had prepared earlier on top of the trap, simply hiding it as a grassland. With the thick fog as a cover, he should be able to fool the bronze-skinned bison. "Sam, take Eva and get out of here. There are 2 of them. We can't beat them," Dennis roared as he sidestepped the oncoming bronze-skinned bison. He then smashed his massive mace viciously into the bison's head, causing it to veer off course and charge straight toward the pit. 2 of them. Crap. Sam's expression changed upon hearing this. He grabbed onto Eva's hand and rushed up the hill. 1 bronze-skinned bison was enough to deal with, 2 of them were simply too much for them to handle. Eva's face had also paled slightly. After all, she had been roaming the wilderness with the Rose mercenary squad for over a year, so she was well aware of just how powerful magic beasts were. She was well aware of just how powerful 2 4th-tier magic beasts were. However, it was clearly too late for them to retreat now. The first bronze-skinned bison charged directly toward them, only to fall into the pit that was around 3 meters deep. However, the pit was only slightly higher than its body, and the soil on the walls was crumbling as it struggled, as if it were going to jump out at any moment. What was even worse was that the other bronze-skinned bison was completely ignoring Kywil and the others' attacks as it charged directly toward Sam and the others. "Run up the hill." Sam pushed Eva up the hill before arching his body backward like a drawn bow. He hurled his pitchfork toward the bronze-skinned bison, and at the same time, he drew the hatchet hanging from his waist and charged toward the bronze-skinned bison. Skoll also charged down the hill without any hesitation. The pitchfork struck the bronze-skinned bison's head with unerring accuracy, but it was only able to leave a small wound on its head. Sam and Skoll were then sent flying by the bronze-skinned bison's horns before crashing to the ground and throwing up mouthfuls of blood at the same time. After being pushed by Sam, Eva only managed to run a few steps before her legs went soft and she fell to the ground. She looked back at Sam and Skoll who were sent flying, as well as the ferocious bronze-skinned bison that was charging towards her. She screamed and closed her eyes. "No!" Kywil yelled, and all of the other mercenaries also wore sympathetic expressions. "Don't be scared, Eva, I'm here." Right at this moment, a voice sounded, and Evan flew out from behind the hill before landing in front of Eva. He pushed his hands forward, and a thick wall of ice appeared before him, upon which dazzling ice crystals blossomed. Bam! A muffled thump erupted as the bronze-skinned bison crashed viciously into the wall of ice. It was as if it had crashed into a thick stone wall, and it came to an abrupt halt. Its horns left a pair of indentations on the wall of ice, but it was unable to shatter it. "Master Evan, you saved me. You're so awesome." Eva opened her eyes with incredulity as she stared at Evan's back. Her eyes were filled with elation and reverence. He blocked it. Kywil and the others were elated, but at the same time, they were also a little taken aback. They didn't think that Evan would be able to unleash his spell at such a critical juncture. "I'm glad you're all right. This is what I should do." Evan smiled as he propped himself up against the wall of ice, but his eyes were filled with unease. He could also sense just how sturdy this wall of ice was. Could it be that he had already progressed to the 4th tier in this dire situation? Chapter 553. Evan's expression stiffened upon hearing this, and he turned to look up the hill. Kywil and the others also turned toward the hill with surprise on their faces, only to discover that it was none other than Meg and Amy. Amy was holding a purple wand in her hand, and specks of blue light were flying out of the wand before landing on the wall of ice that Evan and the others had been standing in. Could it be that this wall of ice was cast by Amy? The same thought flashed through everyone's minds at the same time. However, judging from how young Amy was, it was far more difficult to believe that she had been able to unleash an ice spell that could stop an oncoming Ironhide bull than Evan had made a breakthrough in battle. After all, a 4-year-old 4th-tier magic caster had never appeared on the entire Norland continent before. Why are they here? A hint of urgency appeared on Chewil's face. The sudden appearance of the second Ironhide Bull had already put the Rose mercenary squad in a precarious situation. Even though this Ironhide Bull had been temporarily stopped by Evan, the other one that had fallen into the trap had already forced its way out, and it looked like it would be able to jump out of the trap very soon. When that time came, no one would be able to stop it. Meanwhile, Evan's expression also changed drastically. He had worked so hard to rebuild his image in front of Eva and Sivir, yet this little brat was trying to steal his credit. She was just a little brat who hadn't even grown out her teeth, yet she claimed that she was the one who cast the spell. She was just as arrogant as her father. "Mph, don't spout nonsense, little brat. You don't even know how to cast a frost spell, and you dare to claim that you were the one who set up this wall of ice? I'm a true blue 3rd-tier magic caster, and I've been trying to break through to the 4th tier to become an intermediate magic caster. There's always a chance that I'll be able to cast a spell of this caliber." Evan glowered at Amy. If he really did break through to the 4th tier and become an intermediate magic caster, then Chewil would have to pay a price if he wanted to stay in the Rose mercenary squad. This was why he had continued to stay even after being rejected. It appeared that he was very close to achieving his goal, and he could even bring it up when he returned to the Rose mercenary squad. "Bro Meg, hurry up and leave. There were 2 Ironhide Bulls here, so it was very dangerous. We can't deal with it," Dennis shouted at Meg. His face was also full of anxiety. He had a good impression of Meg and his daughter from their previous interactions. Naturally, he didn't want to see them get involved. "Is that so? It seems that you don't believe me." A thoughtful expression appeared on Amy's face as she looked at Evan. She nodded, and said, "Then, I'll withdraw the spell and let you experience your true power." He withdrew his wand, and the blue light instantly receded. The beautiful ice crystals on the ice wall in front of Evan disappeared, and the blue light also dimmed significantly, as if it had suddenly lost its spiritual nature. After retreating for about a dozen meters, the Ironhide Bull stomped its hooves into the ground and charged toward Evan and the others again. Even though its speed was slightly slower than before, it was still extremely terrifying, and it was as if the entire mountain was trembling violently. Evan had naturally sensed the changes that had occurred to the ice wall. The thickness hadn't changed, but something was indeed missing. However, he didn't know what it was. He didn't have time to think about that now. He focused all of his attention on the oncoming Ironhide Bull, and his eyes were filled with confidence. He had been able to keep the Ironhide Bull at bay just then, so there was no way he would be able to do the same now. His wand was constantly injecting magic power into the ice wall, while his left hand was gently pressed against the surface of the ice, basking in the chill and weight of the ice. This ice wall was the pinnacle of his work, and it was also the best manifestation of his power. "Master Evan can do it. He's the most perfect man. He's the most powerful magic caster." Eva stood behind Evan with a look of reverence and relief on her face. Thinking back to how Evan had descended from the sky and blocked the Ironhide Bull's attack for her, her heart thumped in her chest. It turned out that she was so important to him that he was willing to risk his life to save her. Those 2 guys were clearly trying to sow discord between them. "Why do you have to seek death?" Mag took a look at Evan and Eva, who was standing behind him, and sighed in his heart. "Don't you have any fucking idea of what you're capable of?" Flexing was the most dangerous thing to do. However, he didn't have any good feelings toward this shameless couple. Biting the hand that fed him had already become a part of their repertoire. As such, he merely looked on with a calm and collected expression. He wouldn't attack unless he was attacked first. That was Meg's principle. Evan should be able to keep it at bay, right? Sam asked with a concerned expression as he clasped a hand over his chest. He was able to keep it at bay even though it was moving so quickly, so he should be fine now. Skoll wasn't all that concerned. He grimaced as he massaged his waist and strode toward the trap with his rod in hand. The Ironhide Bull that had fallen into the trap was about to jump out, so he had to stop it. "Don't let it come out. Otherwise, it'll be even more troublesome." Kywell also hurled the boomerang in his hand toward Evan and Eva with a concerned expression. He had a feeling that the ice wall had become a little different, but at the same time, he didn't think that Amy was a powerful magic caster. However, before the boomerang had a chance to strike, the ironhide bull that had retreated a couple of steps back abruptly leaped out of the pit. It brushed the boomerang aside with its head before looking up at Meg and Amy. A plume of white smoke escaped from its nostrils as it charged toward Meg and Eva. Crap! Kywell and the others' expressions all changed as they hurriedly chased after the ironhide bull with all their might. At the same time, the other ironhide bull crashed heavily into the ice wall in front of Evan. In the instant of the collision, Evan's originally confident expression instantly changed. The terrifying power coming from his left hand, as well as the ice surface that was instantly filled with cracks, all made him terrified. The ice wall that was like an impenetrable wall just a moment ago had turned into an extremely fragile block of ice at this moment. That's impossible. Eva's eyes also widened with horror and incredulity as she stared at the cracked ice wall. Bam! A crisp crack erupted as the thick ice wall was shattered into countless shards of ice. The ironhide bull was only slowed down slightly, and it crashed into Evan and Eva with a resounding boom. Its sturdy horns broke their bones, and it propelled them forward for several meters before crashing to the ground around 10 meters away. Chapter 554. Evan threw up a mouthful of blood as his chest caved in. His face was deathly pale with agony, but he was still filled with bewilderment and horror as he looked at the ironhide bull. The wall of ice had been able to keep it at bay with ease just a moment ago, so why had it suddenly become so fragile? Could it be that the little brat really had used some magic to make the wall of ice so resolute? With that in mind, even he was in disbelief. Furthermore, the ironhide bull clearly had no intention of letting them go after sending them flying. It charged toward them again, and they were completely immobilized, so there was no way for them to evade. All they could do was wait for their deaths. Eva reached out and crawled in Evan's direction. She made a gurgling sound with her mouth. If she could die by Wizard Evan's side, it would not be so bad. Crap! They had thought that Evan and the others would be fine, but to their surprise, the tables had turned in an instant. The resolute wall of ice had been shattered, and Evan and Eva had been sent flying with severe injuries. They had to face the ironhide bull again, and there was no one else present who could save them. Expressions of despair appeared on Kywell and the others' faces. Meanwhile, the ironhide bull charging toward Meg and Amy was also unstoppable. The most vulnerable people present were now standing on the brink of death, but there was nothing they could do. This sense of powerlessness struck them with despair. Sigh, didn't your master teach you that even if you can't beat your opponent, you can think of other ways? Amy looked at Evan with an exasperated expression. She then pointed her wand at the ground in front of them with a smile, and said, "For example, you can make this stupid bull dance first." A layer of ice appeared beneath Evan and Eva's feet before extending downward along the slope. The oncoming ironhide bull stepped onto the block of ice, and its front hooves slid down to its knees. It slid upward for a while before stopping less than half a meter away from Evan and the others. It looked up at them with an indignant expression and let loose a couple of moos before struggling to its feet. It was as if it were dancing on ice, but it was unable to approach Evan and Eva in the slightest. First tier ice spell, frost magic. Amy looked at Evan with a shrug. Evan and Eva had thought that they were going to die from the ironhide bull's charge, and they both heaved a collective sigh of relief. However, a blush appeared on their faces upon hearing Amy's nonchalant words. They had done everything they could to stop the ironhide bull, only to be severely wounded by it. However, it had been subdued by a 4-year-old half-elf girl, and she had even used a frost magic spell on it. This was a massive slap to their faces. However, if she was a first-tier magic caster, then that meant that he was the one who had unleashed that wall of ice. At the very least, that meant that he was able to unleash a 4th-tier spell, and he was far more powerful than Amy. Evan consoled himself internally. The pain from his wounds was making him feel like he was about to faint. This was the first time that he had sustained such a grievous injury. Kaiwil and the others all heaved a collective sigh of relief upon seeing this. They didn't think that Amy would step in to save Evan and the others in the nick of time. What was even more incredible to them was that Amy really was a magic caster. Even if she was only a first-tier magic caster, at her current age, she could definitely be hailed as a prodigy for being able to use a frost magic spell in such an ingenious manner. This is the most basic usage of a frost magic spell. My master told me that there is no difference between strong and weak magic spells. The true difference lies in the people who use them, like you and me. Amy looked at Evan as she spoke. She spread open her right hand, and a ball of flames of extreme frost appeared over her palm. The flames of ice slowly danced on her fingertip as she pointed a finger at the ironhide ball. The flames of ice didn't appear to be traveling very quickly, but they reached the ironhide ball in the blink of an eye. The tiny flames of ice weren't even as large as the ironhide bull's eyes, but an expression of shock and horror appeared on the ironhide bull's face for the first time, and it immediately turned to flee. However, the flames of ice had already landed on the bull's head, and frost instantly enshrouded the entire ironhide bull, sealing it in ice from head to toe. It was still in a kneeling position, as if it had been carved into a statue. These magic fluctuations. She's an intermediate magic caster. Evan's eyes widened with incredulity as he stared at the frozen ironhide bull. As a third-tier magic caster, he was able to easily determine the power of a magic spell. To be able to seal an ironhide bull in ice with a single flame of ice was something that was completely beyond his reach. A 4-year-old intermediate magic caster, and a half-elf at that, had already far surpassed him in terms of magic. Evan felt as if his heart had stopped for 3 seconds. The feeling of asphyxiation made him forget about the pain in his chest, and he began to question the meaning of life. There is no such thing as a powerful magic spell, the true difference lies in the person using it. These words struck Evan's heart like a sledgehammer. If someone else had made a name for themselves a long time ago, perhaps he would have felt a little better. However, these words had come out of Amy's mouth, and he felt as if a sharp sword had been plunged into his heart. Everything that he had done thus far had made him look like a clown. This father and daughter duo were not people that he could mess with. Just this 4-year-old little girl alone was far more powerful than him. How? How is this possible? Eva was also in complete disbelief at the sight of this. This ironhide bull, which even Evan couldn't resist, had been sealed in ice by Amy with ease. As a magic caster, she naturally knew what this entailed. She abruptly turned to look at Amy, and all that was left in her eyes was fear toward the powerful. So powerful. Kaiwil and the others couldn't help but falter in their footsteps as they stared at the frozen ironhide bull with astonishment etched on their faces. They didn't think that Amy would be the one to tame the ironhide bull in the end. They finally understood why Meg dared to take Amy into the wilderness and target the ironhide bull. Look out! Kaiwil faltered momentarily before letting loose a cry of alarm. One of the ironhide bulls had been sealed in ice, but the one charging toward Meg and the others didn't stop. Just as everyone was still in a daze, it had already reached less than 5 meters away from Meg and the others before hurtling toward Meg and the others at an extremely fast speed. Big dumb bull, you have to behave yourself too. Amy turned to the ironhide bull and extended her little right hand. I'll take care of this big dumb bull. Meg smiled as he strode forward and laid a hand on his waist. A cold light flashed, and the ironhide bull barely brushed past him. After charging forward a few steps, it collapsed to the ground with a resounding thud. It was already dead, and its scorching blood soaked the mountain rocks before converging into a small stream that slowly flowed downward. Chapter 555. Deathly silence reigned over the illusionary Mist Valley. Kaiwil, Dennis, Skoll, Scott, Sam, and Monkey stood down below, looking up at the smiling father and daughter duo on the mountain slope. Their eyelids twitched as they swallowed involuntarily. Of the 2 ironhide bulls, one was dead while the other was sealed in ice. The father and daughter duo were like death gods who had descended from the heavens with ease. Amy's magic had already stunned them, but Mag's sword strike was so fast that they couldn't even see it, and they couldn't even fathom just how powerful he was. His speed wasn't very fast, perhaps only comparable to that of a normal first-tier knight, but his saber strike was so fast that it was barely visible to the naked eye. That tiny bull-slaying saber was able to slice open the ironhide bull's skin with ease, and what was even more incredible was that the saber strike had taken its life. In the face of an ironhide bull that had virtually no weaknesses, even the most experienced hunter could only think of a way to exhaust its stamina before trapping it with a trap. No one would try to attack it at close range, as its tough and powerful horns were like a pair of scimitars that could deliver a lethal blow to anyone who approached it. Who is he? Evan's eyes gradually widened as he stared at Meg, and a chill suddenly ran down his spine. If he had attacked Meg at noon, would he have suffered the same fate as this ironhide bull? He suddenly understood why he had been feeling so uneasy at noon. If Meg really wanted to kill him, then he most likely wouldn't even be able to retaliate, not to mention that his daughter was an intermediate magic caster. Ding! Congratulations, host, you have successfully completed the mission to capture an ironhide bull. Mission time consumed, 6H. You have successfully completed the mission within 12H. You have received the right to use the required ingredients and kitchenware, as well as 0.5 strength point and a mooncake recipe. Right at this moment, the system's voice sounded, and at the same time, a special effect of fireworks appeared in Meg's mind. Perfect. Meg's eyes lit up. Regardless of whether it was the strength points or the mooncake recipe, these were all items that Meg needed right now. If he could increase his strength by a large margin, and at the same time, he could start preparing for the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet, the system was simply sending charcoal in snowy weather. Their trip to Miwu Valley had not been in vain. Father is so awesome. Amy broke the silence as she clapped her little hands and looked up at Meg with admiration. Amy is also very good. Meg smiled and patted Amy's head. Then he looked down at Kywil and the others, who were still silent, and said with a smile, Miss Kywil, I think I accidentally stole your prey again. You won't mind, right? 2 ironhide bulls. We've already become their prey. A wry smile appeared on Chiwil's face as she extended a sincere bow to Meg. Mr. Meg, you saved our Rose mercenary squad. Thank you. Mr. Meg, I didn't think that you would be so powerful. You were able to kill an ironhide bull with a single slash of your saber. Could it be that you're a 4th-tier knight? Dennis looked at Meg with an astonished expression. That saber strike had truly stunned him. You're far too kind, Miss Kywil. Meg nodded before shaking his head in a modest manner as he said, I was just able to kill a bull with ease. If it were any other type of magic beast, I probably wouldn't even be able to take on a 1st-tier one. At his current level of power, he was indeed not powerful enough to take on a 4th-tier magic beast. However, he had slain tens of thousands of ironhide bulls in the test field for the god of cookery, so he was very familiar with their body structure. As such, he was completely unperturbed by the sight of the charging ironhide bull. Instead, he simply judged where he would be able to land a fatal blow with a single slash of his saber. Do you think you can kill an ironhide bull with a single slash of your saber just because you've killed a lot of bulls? All of the mercenaries stared at Meg with wide eyes. They felt like this guy was just messing with them, but judging from his serious expression, it appeared that he was telling the truth. Most importantly, the kebabs he made were super delicious. A chef like him really didn't seem like a knight at all. I'm going to treat Eva and Evan's injuries first. Kywil rushed up the mountain. She was quite touched that Evan had stood in front of Eva without any regard for his own safety. All of the members of the mercenary squad were sworn brothers who had gone through thick and thin together, so at the very least, what Evan had just done was passable. All of the other mercenaries also hurriedly rushed up the mountain. Sam and Skoll were lying on the ground. They had also sustained significant injuries during the battle. The medicine is in the bag. Save Master Evan first. Eva stuttered as she looked at Sivir, and her head tilted to the side as she fainted. Save Eva first, I can still hold on. Evan looked at Eva with a concerned expression. His face was deathly pale. Go and fix Evan's bones first, then stop the bleeding. We have to get back to Chaos City as soon as possible to find a healer for their injuries. Kywil untied a bag from Eva's body before handing over all types of medicine to Dennis and Monkey. He then turned around to block everyone's view before removing Eva's clothes and beginning to treat her injuries. "Father, what should we do now?" Amy asked as she looked at Meg. "We can provide some help to Uncle Sam and Uncle Skoll. For example, we can give them some ice to use as ice packs to alleviate their pain." Meg carried Amy down the mountain. He had a good impression of Sam and Skoll, so he was quite concerned to see them injured. Sam and Skoll had been rammed by the Ironhide Bull, but thankfully, they had taken precautions and avoided being struck in any vital areas, so their injuries were still manageable. Skoll seemed to have broken one of his ribs, while Sam's injuries were slightly better. There was only a gash on his stomach, but he wasn't bleeding very much. With Amy's help, his pain was greatly alleviated. Kyle and the others bandaged the wounded. Evan and Eva's injuries were quite severe, but they weren't life-threatening for the time being, so everyone heaved a collective sigh of relief. Meg looked at the sweaty Kyle and said, "We only need one of these Ironhide Bulls. If you need the other one, I can give it to you. After all, if you didn't chase them all the way here, we might not have been able to find them." Kyle looked into Meg's eyes, and was silent for a moment before saying, "Thank you." "You're welcome, but I'll have to trouble you again," Meg said with a smile. "It's my pleasure." Kyle nodded, and began to treat the wounded and frozen Ironhide Bull before preparing to return to Chaos City. Dusk was approaching, but there were still many customers gathered outside Amy's. Some of them were unaware that Amy's was closed, while others were aware that the restaurant was closed, so they wanted to try their luck and see if the restaurant would reopen at night. However, all of them were drawn to a certain person at the entrance of the restaurant, and gathered around him as if they were spectating a show. Ricky raised his chubby hand high into the air, and yelled with an excited expression, "I'm going to repeat myself one last time. Owner of Amy's, if you're in the restaurant and you're a man, then respond. As long as you admit that your cooking skills are inferior to mine and apologize to me in front of everyone, then I'll let you go. Otherwise, accept my challenge and have a cooking duel between men." All of the customers discussed spiritedly among themselves, speculating whether Meg would appear and accept Ricky's challenge. There were also people who were curious about the conditions of Ricky's challenge. H. A coward doesn't deserve to be a chef in the Aiden Square. A vibrant smile appeared on Ricky's face, and his mood swelled even further. He refused to believe that Meg had really gone out to gather ingredients. He had to have gone into hiding because he was afraid of losing to him. Otherwise, why would he leave his business and go out for an entire day? Ricky looked at all of the customers gathered in front of the restaurant. Mammy Restaurant really was a golden chicken. He rolled his eyes and waved his arm as he said, "If you think the stakes are still too low, then I've decided to raise the stakes again. The loser of this roast meat duel will have to pay 3 prices. 1. Kowtow to the loser and call them father 3 times. 2. Give all of the recipes in their restaurant to the loser. And 3. Give up the ownership of the entire restaurant. Chapter 556. Mr. Mac is back. Someone called out, and all of the customers' eyes lit up. The crowd parted to create a path for Mag, who was pushing his bicycle in, as if they were welcoming their king. Meg looked at Ricky with a calm expression. He still had some recollection of this fatso who had been sent flying by his door last time, but he didn't think that this guy would come looking for trouble again. Furthermore, he was here to challenge him to a cooking duel. He had only just learned how to make beef kebabs, and this guy was here to challenge him to a cooking duel. Mag had initially wanted to turn down a task like this, but to his surprise, the system issued him a new mission: accept the roast meat challenge from the owner of Ricky's rotisserie, and defeat him in the process. After completing the mission, you will receive 0.5 strength point for 1/2. Note: host must accumulate 0.5 strength points to use this mission. Even though the 0.25 strength point was a little strange, Meg was naturally more than happy to accept it. Furthermore, this guy was making such a big fuss in front of his restaurant, so he had to teach him a lesson. If he didn't teach him a lesson, everyone would come to his restaurant and stomp on him in the future. Furthermore, he was also quite tempted by Ricky's third condition. It was a restaurant that had once ranked in the top 30 on the Aden Square, and that would most likely include all of the items in the restaurant. This was a huge bet, and regardless of whether he could use it to expand his restaurant, rent it out, or even sell it, it would be an extremely profitable investment. Looks like Mr. Mac really did go out to gather ingredients. I knew Mr. Mac wouldn't back down. He accepted the challenge as soon as he came back. Mr. Mac really is Mr. Mac. Could it be that he's going to cook roast meat for his new dish? The roast meat from Ricky's rotisserie is quite good. It's only slightly inferior to Duca's restaurants in the Aden Square. I wonder if Mr. Mac really has a trump card up his sleeve. I don't want to be unable to eat at Mammoth in the future. I feel like there's going to be a good show today. I didn't come here in vain. All of the customers looked at the dirt on Meg's feet, and they began to discuss spiritedly among themselves. Some of them were very confident, while others were a little worried. However, most of them were looking forward to an exciting duel. After all, cooking duels were rare in the Aden Square, and it was even rarer to encounter one. Ricky's eyelids twitched at the sight of Meg making his way through the crowd. He didn't think that Meg would agree so decisively. Furthermore, from the looks of it, Meg really did look like he had been out all day. Ricky's face also flushed with embarrassment upon hearing what Meg had just said. The challenge hadn't even begun, yet this guy was already trying to take advantage of him. Ricky was very displeased with Meg's confident attitude. However, before Ricky had a chance to say anything, Amy, who was holding Ugly Duckling in her arms, turned to him with a warning expression, and said, "Uncle Roastmeat, you're not allowed to fight with me for father. Father is mine alone, so don't even think about it. PFFF. Ha ha ha, Amy is so adorable. As expected, she really is your biological daughter. Even her tone is infuriating, but why do I still find her so adorable?" All of the customers burst into laughter. Even the employee standing beside Ricky was on the verge of bursting into laughter. He looked up into the sky and pinched his own thigh with his right hand. You. Ricky's entire body was trembling with rage, and he couldn't even muster up a second word. I can accept the duel, but how do we decide on the format, time, and location? Also, what are the specific terms and conditions of the duel? All of those things have to be discussed in advance, and we can sign a notarial contract. If you don't have any issues with that, we can decide on it right now, Meg said to Ricky with a serious expression. He was very pleased with Amy's performance. Ricky took a couple of deep breaths to calm himself down. He looked at Meg's calm expression, and his mind was already racing. This guy doesn't seem like he's completely unprepared. Could it be that he also knows how to roast meat? That's impossible. I've already done a detailed investigation, and the dishes in his restaurant have nothing to do with roast meat. There's not even a grill in his kitchen. Even if he really is a genius, roasting meat requires perfect control over the heat, and that's not something that can be mastered in a day or two. Hence, this guy's calm expression is most likely an act in order to save face in front of the customers. If that's the case, then my chances of winning are extremely high. This restaurant's value is about the same as Ricky's rotisserie's, and it can continue to appear on the Aden Square food competition rankings, so it has an advantage over Ricky's rotisserie. The terms and conditions of the duel are completely equal, or even slightly higher. As for the terms and conditions, they're the three that I just mentioned. Ownership of the restaurant includes ownership of the restaurant, all of the items in the restaurant, and all of the employees of the restaurant. As for the judging method, I think the fairest way to judge is to choose 5 people from the guests present as judges. They will vote on our barbecue, and the one with the most votes will be the winner. You can decide on the time and location, Ricky said with a confident smile as he looked at Meg. All right, let's set the time to be in front of Amy's in an hour. We'll have an outdoor roast, but I'm going to take a shower and change my clothes first. You can also get someone to bring all of the items over, and we'll begin as soon as the time is up. Meg nodded. He wasn't interested in the recipes of Ricky's rotisserie, and he didn't want to have an idiotic son, but seeing how Ricky's face was so close to his, he couldn't bear to push his face away. An outdoor roast. A hesitant look appeared on Ricky's face. Ricky's rotisserie had been passed down from his ancestors for 3 generations, and the roast method had always been kept a secret. Now that Meg was requesting an outdoor roast, wouldn't everyone be able to see the entire roast process? A commotion broke out among the customers when they heard this. In the past, chef duels were usually held in restaurants, and the onlookers could only see the dishes that were brought to the table at the end. No one thought that Meg would want to break the norm and request an outdoor roast. This would undoubtedly be very interesting to the onlookers, and they were also very curious as to how Meg was able to cook such delicious food. Furthermore, the duel would begin in an hour, so there wasn't much waiting time, so it was worth the wait. Chapter 557. News that the owner of Amy's would be facing off against the owner of Ricky's rotisserie in an hour quickly spread throughout the entire Aden Square. On one side was a new restaurant that had recently risen to the top of the rankings board, while on the other side was an established rotisserie in the Aden Square. A match like this was extremely intriguing. Of course, the most important thing was that this was going to be an outdoor duel, which meant that all of the onlookers would be able to witness the entire cooking process. This was something that had never happened in the Aden Square before, and this piqued the curiosity of many onlookers. All of them had nothing better to do, so they flocked to the entrance of Amy's, and soon, a massive crowd had formed. Some of them were regular customers of Amy's, some of them had heard about Ricky's rotisserie, but most of them were just here to watch the show. Melon seeds, peanuts, and ice water are on sale in the front row. There's also a limited number of stools for sale. If you want to buy one, you can't miss it. 1111 and Lulu weaved through the crowd with 2 large bags of melon seeds and peanuts in tow. They were also carrying a basket of stools on their backs, and business was booming. There was still half an hour until the duel began, and many people were already waiting outside in order to secure a good spot. If they were lucky, they might even be selected to become a judge. If they had nothing better to do, they would buy some melon seeds, peanuts, and a glass of ice water. It was a perfect place to sit quietly and munch on melon seeds. Not long after that, the employees of Ricky's rotisserie arrived with 2 horse-drawn carriages. They stopped in front of Amy's, and under Ricky's instructions, they began to move the heavy cooking utensils and a young goat onto the carriages. All of the customers looked on with curiosity in their eyes. They had eaten rotisserie many times before, but this was the first time that they had seen someone cook rotisserie, and they were all looking forward to this duel even more. Isn't that Amy's? Why are there so many people outside? Robert murmured to himself as he looked in the direction of Amy's. He hesitated momentarily before making his way in that direction. A luxurious horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of Duca's restaurant, and Hill stepped out of the carriage with her head slightly bowed. She was just about to get out of the carriage when she caught sight of the massive crowd in the distance, and her brows furrowed slightly as she asked, "What's going on? Why are there so many people?" Young Mistress Hill, the owner of Amy's and the owner of Ricky's rotisserie, are going to have an outdoor cooking competition. All of these people are just spectators, but when it comes to roast meat, our Duca's restaurant is still number 1 in the entire Aden Square and Chaos City. The restaurant manager who had come out to greet them said with a confident smile, "Amy's? Is it the new restaurant that has been in the limelight recently?" Mr. Hill asked with a surprised look on his face. "Yes, but this restaurant barely made it into the top 30 of the gourmet cuisine rankings. Our Duca's restaurant is still number 1. The manager nodded with a smile, but there was a hint of nervousness in his eyes. The Hill and the Buffett family were the biggest financiers of Duca's restaurant. They spent tens of thousands of gold coins on the restaurant every year. If they were transferred to other restaurants, it would be a huge loss. A restaurant that has only been open for a little over a month has all 5 of its dishes in the top 100, and one of its dishes has even made it into the top 30. Just that alone makes this restaurant very interesting." Mr. Hill looked at the massive crowd before getting back into the carriage, and said, "Let's go and have a look. I'm curious to see how the owner of this restaurant has managed to accumulate so many loyal customers in just over a month. Even I can't compare to him in this regard. Take care, Your private room is still reserved for you." The manager lowered his head in a respectful manner as he looked on at the departing horse-drawn carriage with a complex expression. Who would have thought that the Duca's restaurant, which had dominated the Aden Square for so many years, would feel threatened by a small restaurant that had only recently opened? "Why do you look so down, Alva? Has your Duca's restaurant released any new dishes recently?" "I haven't been here in a while." Right at this moment, a sharp voice sounded from the side. Alva's brows immediately furrowed as a hint of disgust flashed through his face. However, in the instant that he turned around, a warm smile appeared on his face as he looked at the middle-aged man before him, and said, "Greetings, Master Febid. Our restaurant hasn't released any new dishes recently. I'm afraid we'll have to disappoint you." The middle-aged man was tall and thin, and he was wearing a long grey trench coat with a black hat on his head. He held a brown cane in his hand, and there was a pipe tucked into the pocket of his trench coat. He had a hooked nose, and a small mustache that was slightly curled around his lips. He stared into Alva's eyes with a pair of dark brown eyes, and a mocking smile appeared on his face as he said, "A restaurant that has lost its ability to innovate will be eliminated sooner or later. If you can't even release a single new dish in a month, then the head chef might as well go home and raise pigs. Using the same old dishes to take the top spot on the Aden Square food competition rankings is an insult to the food competition rankings and its customers." Yes. You're right. Our head chef is doing his best to develop new dishes, and I'm sure they'll appear on the menu soon." Alva nodded as cold sweat began to appear on his forehead. In Chaos City, or rather on the Norland continent, a new profession had emerged in the past few decades: food critics. They made a living by writing articles and reviewing food from all over the world, and they were very popular among foodies. Febid was one of them, and he was quite renowned in the entire Norland continent's food criticism circle. Febid's reputation didn't stem from how many unknown delicacies he had unearthed or how delicious they were. Instead, it stemmed from his sharp and venomous tongue. Almost every restaurant's food had been reviewed by him, and even the Duca's restaurant's most renowned roast pig had been labeled as excessively oily, slaughtering little pigs, and too cruel by him. All of the restaurants that had been reviewed by Febid would more or less be negatively affected, so Febid was also known as the food critic who was the least liked by restaurant owners. If it weren't for the fact that he was in Chaos City, he would have most likely been knocked unconscious, stuffed into a gunny sack, and thrown into a lake to feed the fishes. Chapter 558. Compared to the commotion outside the restaurant, aside from Yarbemia, who was pacing back and forth in front of the counter with an anxious expression on her face, Amy's was completely silent. Ugly Duckling had already fallen asleep on the counter, and its tail was swaying from time to time. After a while, Meg took a shower and changed into a clean set of chef's robes, then came downstairs with Amy, who had changed into a floral dress. He straightened his collar, and his ironed chef's robes were impeccably ironed, giving him a refreshing look. After staying in the wilderness for an entire day, Meg's exhaustion was completely wiped away after a hot shower, and he was looking forward to the upcoming cooking competition. The Ironhide Bull and the mutant purple golden mink, Kywil, and the others had helped him take care of them. He had only taken a piece of the mink's brain. The mercenary squad had many ways to maximize the value of these items, and all Meg had to do was wait at home for the money. This was clearly the best choice for him, and it was also a way for Kywil and the others to express their gratitude toward Meg for gifting them an Ironhide Bull. "Boss, are you really going to compete with him in roast meat? I don't think you've ever roasted meat before, right?" Yarbemia was a little anxious as she looked at Meg. "Of course not, I just roasted meat this afternoon." Meg looked at the concerned Yarbemia with a smile. It seemed that she didn't have much confidence in him. "Big sister MIA, father's roast meat is super delicious. Amy already had a taste of it this afternoon, and father said that he's going to make even more delicious roast meat for us tonight. We even brought back a large piece of beef," Amy chimed in with an expectant smile. Yarbemia looked at the confident smile on Meg's face, as well as Amy's confident expression, and her nervousness was greatly alleviated. She murmured to herself, "That's right, Boss is the most talented chef in the world. There's nothing that he can't cook. Even if it's roast meat, he'll definitely be able to cook the best roast meat. I believe in you, boss. What can I do for you, MIA? Yarbemia asked as she looked at Meg with an energetic smile on her face. Well, I do need Mia's help with something. We're going to be having an outdoor competition soon, so we have to bring all of the kitchenware to the entrance of the restaurant. Megan then strode into the restaurant. Why hasn't the boss of Mammy Restaurant come out yet? It's almost an hour, and he's to his roast meat. That's right, look at Ricky's rotisserie. The roast meat has already been assembled, and they're starting to burn the charcoal. However, they've set up a few wooden planks around the roast meat. Is that to prevent others from stealing their cooking? Roasting meat is a trade secret, so it's normal that they don't want others to see it. I wonder if Mr. Mac will do the same. If that's the case, then this outdoor competition won't be very entertaining. Don't be in such a hurry. Boss Mag is super punctual. He'll open the shop right on time, and he won't delay the opening for even a minute. There are still 15 minutes left. As time passed, the onlookers outside the restaurant became more and more restless. Ricky's rotisserie was almost ready, but Mammis was completely silent, and its doors remained closed. Is this guy going to go back on his word? Ricky stood in front of his roast meat and looked at Mammis with a cold smile on his face. He wasn't worried at all. Both parties had already signed the agreement, and this was a legal matter in Chaos City. If Meg were to go back on his word now, then he would lose the competition, and everything that belonged to Mammis would belong to him. This competition isn't on a very large scale, but it's attracted a lot of attention because of the outdoor competition. If it weren't for the fact that these two owners are putting on an act, then the winner of this competition would not only receive the winner's restaurant, but would also be able to attract even more attention. Hill sat in his horse-drawn carriage and looked at the over 1,000 people who had already gathered outside Mammis. This was quite a rare sight even in the Aiden Square. The owner of Mammis is clearly a smart man. He chose to set the location of the competition in front of his own restaurant, and set the time to be 1 hour later. A faint smile appeared on Hill's face. She loved interacting with smart people, and she knew that this rising restaurant would soon meet the requirements to join the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. She had heard that he had a falling out with 2 board members of the Chamber of Commerce, but those 2 were still in the Bastille prison on Jeffrey's side. If this owner cooperated, she wouldn't mind helping his restaurant join the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. The owner of Duca's restaurant was on Jeffrey's side, so she needed a restaurant that could challenge Duca's restaurant status on her side. All of the established restaurants were already used to staying below Duca's restaurant, so this new restaurant that was dominating the Aiden Square food competition had piqued her interest. After looking at the crowd outside the restaurant, she was even more certain of her decision. Hard work alone wasn't enough in business, one had to be smart as well. It was the same with opening a restaurant. Delicious food was common, but there was only one Duca's restaurant. She had also seen this in Mammis, so she was quite curious about what kind of person the owner of this restaurant was. Perhaps she would like to have a chat with him if she had the opportunity. At this moment, the door of Mammis opened with a creak. The noise outside the restaurant suddenly stopped, and everyone turned to look at the entrance. The door slowly opened, and a little half-elf girl with a pair of cute pigtails jumped out. Her bright blue eyes looked at the crowd outside the restaurant, and a surprised expression appeared on her face. She pushed the door to the side, turned around, and shouted into the restaurant, "Father, there are so many people outside. Are they all waiting to eat the free barbecue skewers?" The crowd became even quieter, and everyone had a strange expression on their faces. Most of them had thought that they would be chosen as a judge to eat the free barbecue skewers, but when their thoughts were exposed by a cute little girl, they felt as if their little secret had been seen through. "No, they are here to see if the new dish is worth buying." Meg walked out of the door with a smile, and stepped aside to let Yarbemia, who was holding the metal grill, out. "Just set it up there." Mag pointed at the empty space directly across from Ricky's rotisserie's grill. He didn't think that there would be so many onlookers. He had chosen to hold the match in front of his restaurant for convenience, and had chosen to hold it in an hour as he didn't want to waste too much time on something as trivial as this. After all, he still had to open for business the next day. However, it would be a lie to say that he didn't have any ulterior motives for setting up the competition. He had grown up in a merchant's household, so the mindset of a merchant was deeply ingrained in his heart. The famous food critic, Mr. Febid, is here. Soon, another voice rang out from the crowd, causing an uproar and everyone's attention. I can agree to be one of the judges for this match. The crowd parted to create a path for Febid, who was wearing a greyish-black trench coat and holding a brown cane. He made his way over to Mag, and a mocking look appeared on his face as he said, "Your chef's suit is quite clean. It's just that you look like a mackerel covered in flour." A burst of laughter erupted from the crowd. Febid was quite renowned among the foodies in Chaos City, especially in the foodie community. He was renowned for his sharp tongue, and no one would have thought that he would be here today, and even be one of the judges. He had immediately criticized Meg with his sharp tongue. Even though Meg in his black and white chef suit was a far cry from a flour-coated sorry, it was clear that he was going to make this match a lot more interesting. A smile also appeared on Ricky's face. He didn't have a good impression of this critic who had used all kinds of strange language to criticize Ricky's rotisserie, but it appeared that he was more hostile toward Meg now, and that was undoubtedly good news. "You're also dressed quite well. Even a duck that just came out of the water doesn't have such a perky butt," Meg said with a smile as he looked at Febid's trench coat. "If a duck had a perky butt, then it would be a good match," Amy said with a serious expression as she looked at Febid's trench coat. "In that case, that perky trench coat really does look like a duck that just came out of the water. Ha ha ha, I'm dying of laughter. Mr. Mac and Amy are so mean. I feel like Febid has met his match. 1 versus 2, and is completely defeated." The crowd fell silent for a moment before bursting into even louder laughter. Febid's face flushed slightly, and the mustache around his lips trembled. Normally, all of the restaurant owners would try to curry favor with him after being insulted by him, but he had never been insulted like this before. He looked at Meg and Amy, and he felt like he had met his match. He took a deep breath to calm himself down before pursing his lips. Chefs speak with their cooking skills, so being able to talk with their mouths won't do them any good. You're right. Chefs can still rely on their cooking skills if they don't have a sharp tongue, but if a critic doesn't have a sharp tongue, then they won't even be able to eat, Meg said with a smile. A sharp-tongued critic? Heh, then he was the founder of the Heavenly Tao. After all, he was probably the only person in the world who had been punished by the Heavenly Tao and thrown into an alternate world. In comparison, this fellow from the alternate world who had walked the same path as him was clearly a little too inexperienced, and he just so happened to have encountered him. However, his current identity had changed from a critic to a chef and a boss. He did not have the good temper to stand aside and listen to others dissing him. His true nature was to retort back. The long-suppressed venomous tongue of his had begun to show signs of recovery. Febid was so enraged that he was rendered speechless. He harumphed loudly to express his rage, and took a glance at Meg before standing off to the side in silence. However, he had already decided that he was going to give a good review of this sharp-tongued guy's dish. Ricky really wanted to burst into laughter. At the same time, he was overjoyed. Everyone else was trying to curry favor with the judges, but Meg was going to directly oppose him. It looked like Febid's vote was in the bag. After that, 2 more judges were selected. One of them was a professor from Chaos School who was a part-time food critic, and was quite a renowned chef. The other was the owner of Shale's Rotisserie, who was widely acknowledged to be an honest man. His rotisserie was ranked 50th on the Aden Square Food Competition Rankings Board, so he could be considered a professional when it came to rotisserie. There's one final judge left. Is there anyone who would like to recommend me? Meg asked. In the face of such an exceptional talent, most foodies naturally wouldn't raise their hands. After all, it would be quite awkward if they couldn't say anything, so everyone fell silent. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.